Now, if you do want to help map, and if you do this, by the way, I love you. All you're going to want to do, also going to end up sending the patch to you. It's just simply a GitHub link. Just simply download the patch, and then basically just drag and drop on top of your Unreal Engine 2 runtime editor, and then you're good to go.
Hey there guys, Master64 here, and today I'm going to be attempting to tell you literally everything you need to know about this DevKit that I just released alongside this video going up, how to use it, how to use the editor, how to everything, just freaking everything. I don't want to split it out in a bunch of videos because I know if I manage to get this video out at all, it's going to be a freaking miracle. I just want to get it done. So the first thing you guys are going to want to do, go into the description. The first link you're going to see is a link to the editor installation page, and you're going to want to click on that and install the .exe. After you download the .exe, if you cannot run it, you will need to follow these instructions. First off, go to your desktop and press Windows key and R. Then you want to type in regedit. Alright, so you're going to be greeted with this right here, alright? So why are we doing this? What we essentially are going to tell our machine to do is that we are the admin despite what it thinks, and we're going to run this exe no matter what it tells us. So you want to click on HKey local machine, then click on software, and then Microsoft. I already have clicked on it at one point. Then you want to scroll down all the way to Windows, then current version, and then we want to go to policies, which is right here, and then system. You want to click on this text right here, and you'll have a bunch of this stuff right here. And then you will see this right here. I'm going to double click on that, it's going to pull this right here. Now, this value for you will be a 1. This has to be a 0 in order to run the installer. So set this to 0, click OK, and then restart your system and run the file. Alright, so when you run the file, you're going to get something like this. Alright, don't be scared by it. This is all that's going to happen. I'm going to click setup. It's going to say a bunch of stuff right here that is in such a small font you can't read it. And then it's going to pull up this window right here. Right? So you're going to want to click install. And it's going to be like, you're about to install this thing. That's cool. Click next. Click agree. And then set the directory. Now I have set it to this directory and with this exact name for a very specific reason. I need to tell you this ahead of time. Do not have spaces in the directory. If you have a space in the directory, you're going to run into issues with saving the map. So don't do it. Preferably, just have it directly on your C drive and you'll be completely fine. Then click next. You're going to get a bunch of this stuff right here. Just tick all 3 of these because you might want this to be ticked. You never know. But if you know what you're doing, you might want to tick both these off. But you have to have this one ticked. Now click next and click install. It's going to say installation completed successfully. You don't want to click launch or anything like that because that's just not good. You don't want to actually run it yet. Alright, so after you have installed the editor, you're going to want to go into your Shrek 2 directory, and we're going to want to copy some very specific folders. You're going to want to select animations, static meshes, and textures. Hit Ctrl-C, now go to your directory and paste. You will get this dialogue that is like, do you want to replace this? Skip this. You do not want to replace this. You will crash everything and break everything. Don't do it. Hit skip, and then boom. Now, go into the link in the description and download the DevKit and editor pack. When you open it up, you're going to have something like this. Alright? Now, this might be a higher version, might be a lower version, who knows. But this is what I currently have. So, we want to go into the UE2 editor patch for Shrek 2. Now we're going to have a lot of files and folders here. All I need to worry about are the folders. Simply highlight all these folders, copy them, Then go back to your directory and paste. You'll get, do you want to replace all these? Yes. Alright, so we are nearly ready to actually open up the editor. Amazing. One other thing we need to do is we need to make what I call the fix folder. You might be confused, what in the world is this fix folder going to be? Essentially, this editor is not exactly the most stable, and it can just randomly break at times, which is where the fix folder comes into play, where you essentially will delete this directory, and then you'll use a backup directory, and then run off of that, and then make a backup of the backup, if that makes any sense. Essentially, this fixes about any problems that you'll ever have. So, go back, take the folder, then you want to copy and paste the folder, and then name it whatever the heck you want, but in this case, I'm going to name it YouTube Fix. Now, you want to go to your Shrek 2 directory, and you want to copy, and then you want to paste it in here. Alright, so now we have the editor, and then we have the game basically right next to the editor, or even debatably inside of the editor. Now remember, we cannot have any spaces in any of the folders leading to this place, so we gotta do that, so it fixes it. Now that we've put the game in here, now we need to patch the game with the DevKit. So come back to where we just were, and you want to open up this, and do the exact same thing we did previously, where we're going to want to copy and paste. Except, not quite actually. What we want to do is we actually want to delete the music folder, and then paste it all. It's going to say, hey, we want to replace stuff, say yes. Alright, and now let's confirm that both of these run. When you open this up, you're going to notice that there's a lot of new files and stuff. This is all for people who don't quite know all the console commands, and just want to just run them. So this is just here, just for people who like that. But if you don't want to use it, it's fine, but I'll be demonstrating what all these mainly do anyway, at some point later in the video. So let's click run, and as you can see, the game is running. Wow, would you look at that. And as you can see, we are in the game. Right, so just open a map to make sure that the game is actually running. As you can see, the game is running completely fine with no issues at all. Everything's working just as intended, which is great. Now, one thing you'll want to do while you are developing stuff in Shrek 2 is you want to put this game in window mode. And I'll explain a little bit more about why you should do that. But just know, having it in window mode is very good because you want to be able to switch back and forth in between the editor and the game. Now here's the thing, if you have put this DevKit in your game, you now have access to the console. You can hit tab and it pulls up the console. If you want a resolution like this, I want a 1920 by 1080 monitor. I could type something like that and it sets it to 936p, which I know is a weird resolution, but it's like, I just like the window being generally big, but not exactly just covering the entire thing. That's just how I am. Now, one thing you'll want to do while you have this up, you'll want to run one console command, and you can bind this in defuser.ini, but for right now, I'm just going to type. You want to type execute, space, and then the name of any of these files right here, and we could just simply run these. It is highly recommended that you run this every time. In fact, I would even suggest you go into the defuser.ini and you just bind it to a key, like maybe F7 or something. You could type something like that, and then save it, and every single time you load the game and press F7, it would just enable debug mode, which is really nice. So we type devkit _ and then debug to specify that we're trying to target those files. And then debug. Don't ask why it's debug, that's just how I set it up. You run that, and now a bunch of things just change in the background, which I'll be showing later. Alright, right before we launch this, we want to edit this. Go into the properties, go compatibility. And we're going to run this in compatibility for Windows XP Service Pack 2, click Apply, click OK, run it. You'll see that this really cool screen comes up, and then boom. And at this point, we should be completely up and running. Now, the reason that we run the compatibility mode right there is so that it completely fits the monitor. Otherwise, you're going to have a little bit of a gap over here where my cursor is on the left side of the screen, and that's really annoying. Yeah, so anyway, you have tips. You could randomize the tips if you want. You could read all the tips if you want, but I'm not going to get into the tips here. Here is where we are. Amazing, right? You'll know if you're running the editor because you could see all this text up here. You have the icon. You have all the like slightly cooler looking icons. It's all cool, right? The first thing we want to do, we want to go into prefab. You want to open, and you're going to have this new file here. Simply run this and then leave it alone. You don't even really need to worry about it. Then go into sounds, click open package, and then just click Control A. And then open all of that. And now you should have all of these just sitting right here. Essentially, these are just all the sound files in the game, so I can just click on any of these, then click this. And wow, it played a sound. So yeah, now we can play any of the sounds we want from the entire game just inside of here. Now before we get too excited, I need to talk about what the rest of these 3 folders are and why they are here. Okay, we have this one right here. This one is not, you are more than likely never going to use this at all, unless you just kind of want to look at how the .u files are made, such as like shgame.u and kwgame.u. You can see that in the editor if you look at it. This is how they were built, and you could build it yourself through here as well, so it's really cool. More than likely, you're not interested in that, and you really don't even have a use for it, really. There's not much else you can do with it. Then there is the deleted data. This contains all of the hidden data that no one to remove from their maps, but you can actually resurrect it back into it, which is really cool. But again, you're more than likely never going to have a use for that. And then you have the add-on packs. So there are actually add-ons for the DevKit and the editor patch, which are really cool. For the editor, though, all it is the all dialogue package, which contains this 300 megabyte file. The only reason you ever really want this is if you want to play a voice line directly through the editor so you can know what everyone sounds like, but that's about it. And as for the dev kit, you have all this stuff, which is really neat. It comes with a developer map and textures if you want that. These are already included in the editor, but not in the actual game itself, so you need to patch the game with this add-on pack if you want to share between that, which is super recommended. In fact, we're going to do that right now. We're just going to take that, copy that, and we're going to paste right here, which, by the way, you cannot have your game running when you're patching it. I closed my game right as I did that. Yeah, as I was saying, you have the base sound file pack. This is if you want to be able to modify any of the sounds, you would use the packs through the editor and then transfer it over. But if you don't want to do that, then you could just pull from here and you're fine. Essentially, this means that you could open up a sound file pack from the game, but this is not that helpful at all. It's only helpful for very specific reasons. And then you have this, which is very debatable whether or not you'd ever want any of this. But if you like the Harry Potter games that no wonder made, and would be like, hey, I want to borrow sounds and stuff like that, just because why not, then yeah, you have the option to do that. I've already packaged everything here. You just open up any of these, you just patch it, and then boom, you just have all this stuff right here. It's crazy. You have the mod packing format. This is really just for people who don't exactly know how to package everything. This contains all the folders that you would like replace everything with. It's really cool. Anyway, with that all out of the way, it is time to get into making our first box map. But first, I need to give you guys a quick preface. This massive tutorial, despite how it's going to contain about everything, it's not going to contain anything like how to make a model in a modeling program and import it in, because I just don't know how to do that. And the same thing for animations, I have no clue how to do it. But I know for a fact it's possible, because other modders have done it before. So anyway, let's get into making the map, aka the fun part. So, first thing we want to do, I need to explain something really quickly, and I've explained this in previous tutorials. This game works off of you building into a void, alright? Like, you are carving out of the infinite. You are not adding into the infinite, and that's what a lot of engines do, but not this one. So, first thing we want to do, I want to right-click on this cube builder right here. Don't worry, you'll be using a lot of these probably, except for this one. You'll probably never use that. Yeah, cube builder is your best friend. Use this as much as possible. This essentially allows us to make a brush, alright? And this brush is going to be what we're going to use to carve out everything and to make the map. By default, this is set to 256, 256, 256, with a wall thickness of 16 units. Basically, the only numbers you want to mess with are these three. I think these are pretty self-explanatory. You just get to shape the box any way you want. Definitely recommended that you try to keep everything, like, divisible by a pretty good number. For this example, we'll just make everything divisible by 64 for right now, because I think it's just a pretty solid number for the game. And just so you know, when everything is like divisible by a high number, your performance in the map will increase. So make sure you do this from the very start and not later on. So let's set this all to 1024, and then click build. A red box just appeared on all of these three screens. What are all these screens about? I'm gonna explain that to you real quick. Okay, so you see the text right here. This represents what view you're looking at this through a two-dimensional viewport, alright? Because these are all four called viewports. This is like a top-down view, which I already got to explain what I'm doing, because it could be a little bit confusing. So in these three viewports, you can hold right or left click to move, and if you hold both right and left mouse button, and then move up or down on the mouse, you will zoom. Although I heavily prefer to use the scroll wheel because that is an option on Unreal Engine 2, so that's really nice. And all that applies for over here, real nice stuff. All of these viewports can be right-clicked on right up here. And you have all this stuff right here, but the most important thing is to set the view to radii. So we're going to set that to the viewport down here, because this viewport at the bottom left is the one that allows us to see our map in a 3D render. Click Actors and Radii View. And essentially what that does is it's going to show us the cylindrical collision of actors, and that's pretty helpful for later on. You should get into the habit of doing this every single time you start up the editor, because it will not save. Oh, and one more thing I should mention. If you don't like the layout of these viewports, you can adjust them to your heart's content. You also come over here and click configure, and then you get like these 4 buttons here, and I would never use this one personally, but you can click on any of these, click OK, and then boom, look at that. Now we can like see more stuff. And you can configure that all as much as you want, but I personally have always been a massive fan of this layout in particular, so that's what we're sticking with. Anyway, back to what we were doing. We have a box here now, which is crazy, right? We have a freaking box. What is this box? Well, this red volume is what we like to call the brush. You guys remember when I was talking about the brush? This is literally what the brush looks like. Cool. So how do we move around in this 3D viewport? Well, you could use the left mouse button to move on the horizontal plane. You could use the right mouse button to look around. And if you use both the left and right mouse button, you'll move vertically. So with a combination of all these options that we can have, you can see that whenever you get used to it, you can kind of just move around however you want. And it's kind of weird at first, I will admit. It's very weird to get used to, but eventually you figure out how everything works, and it's really cool. Anyway, you might have been looking at all these buttons for long enough, so I'll tell you what some of them do. All these buttons pertain to something dealing with the brush, except for this one right here, but we don't worry about that. We never click on this. So you have this button right here, which says add. This one says subtract. This one says intersect and de-intersect, all right? All these 4 buttons deal with how exactly the brush is going to carve out the world or adjust their brush. If I click add, it would make everything inside of the brush solid. It would add it to the world. But as I've already said, we need to carve out the infinite. So what you first need to do is you need to click subtract, all right? It's going to subtract everything out, alright? Now you'll see that the default texture is this awful banner, so we're just going to quickly fix that. First, we need to select all of the surfaces inside of our box that we've just made, so we can click it. And you'll notice that if we click other things, it's going to deselect all those. Now we could select multiple by holding control on every single other click that we do, but we don't want to do that. So here's a nice little shortcut. Click on whatever surface you want to select all the surfaces on, and then press Shift B, and that will select all of the surfaces that are connected to this brush in particular. Because I should mention, every single brush that you subtract is a physical object, and you need to remember these physical objects. And the only way you can see brushes is through these 3 viewports. So whenever you make changes to a brush, you would have to straight up delete it and then redo everything in it, because that's just how a BSP tree works. Which is what this all is. This is all BSP, which is like solid world. Alright, so we have all these surfaces selected, so we want to come up here to the texture browser, represented by this cool little icon. Click on that, click on this right here, and we're going to have a lot of stuff in here. Just simply click, Control A, click open, and that's going to open all of the textures in the entire game. For Shrek's Swamp, you'll notice that there's like no textures in here at all, and you might think it's actually broken, but you'd actually be wrong by that. It's all assigned to a group right here. You can see this is a group that they've assigned called commercial_room, and they have assigned a bunch of textures inside of it. But to ignore all groups, because the developers barely even worried about this, click all, and that's going to make it to where you can see all of the textures. Awesome stuff, right? We're going to want to move over to for FGMPIB, because this just has some pretty nice indoor textures. This is like how the factory is made and all that with all those textures. And let's set the texture to this right here. Wow, look at that. We just set some stuff down. Now, one more thing you should do before you deselect all these surfaces, you should right click on this, go down here to alignment, and click box. And this is going to make everything aligned to a box. You more than likely on every single surface in your map are going to want to align this to a box. In about every case. It's just super helpful. And one more thing I should mention, you might notice when I right click there's like 500 things here. Don't worry about any of this. I will explain what all this is very soon actually. Alright, so we have carved out the world with a cube, which is cool. But every single time you do this, and every single time you change stuff like lighting and stuff, which I'll be getting into soon, you need to build the map. So how can you build the map? Well, you want to come up here to build, and then click build all. And that's going to do this. And additionally, you can also click build all through here, and then everything just kind of works. Except you'll notice something weird is that the entire box that we just made is now black. Now why is this? It's because there's no light in it. and it's rendering this with light. You can change the render modes with all of these little icons right here. You can switch it to like wireframe, to texture use. This isn't that helpful. You have BSP cuts, textured, and this is basically just full bright, so if you want to like see everything you're working on, this is very helpful. You have lighting only, if you want to see like how all the lights are interacting with everything, you can do that. You have zones, so you can see zones. This is very important for optimization, but we are way far from that right now. And then we have depth complexity, which is only helpful in outdoor maps, basically. Alright, so let's go back to textured, and we need to add a light so we can see anything. So simply right-click, and you'll see around the bottom is a light. I'm going to click on that, and then click back on the dynamic light, so because now we can just see. Alright, so we can click on this. Amazing, right? We can click on stuff. We have this actor selected. We can actually move this through here, but the easier way of moving stuff is to simply move it through here, okay? Now, I don't want to move it there. That's actually a pretty bad spot. I'm just going to do a Control-Z on that real quick. And before I mess with this light at all, I'm going to want to mess with the properties of it real quick. You can check the properties of an actor by coming up here and clicking on Actor Properties, and it brings up this really cool drop-down menu, which you'll be using a lot. So click on Advanced, click Ed Should Snap, and then close that, because we don't really need to mess with it right now. So what does that do? That makes it to where it's going to bind this actor to a grid, which is almost always better to do than not having it bound to a grid. So you'll see that when we move it now, it is all jittery. Now how do we move it like this? Okay, so basically, if you hold Control and left mouse, it moves it along the X plane. If we hold Control and right mouse, it's going to move it along the Y plane. And if we hold both Control, left mouse, and right mouse, we can move it up and down. So that's all I'm doing. I'm just simply holding both the mouse buttons down and holding Control, and then moving it. Awesome. Here's the problem with this light. It's way too dark in this room. We need to adjust the properties, so we're going to go back over here, and we're going to adjust the properties. I'd recommend making this drop down a little bit bigger, just because you'll be using this a lot, so why not make it bigger? We have a lot of properties here, but for right now, I wouldn't worry about any of these except for lighting and light color. These are the only ones that really apply to this light in particular. We can adjust the light brightness, hue, and saturation, which is really cool. And we can also adjust the light radius. These are the 4 most important properties of the light. So this starts off as a white light, and that's because the saturation level is cranked to 255. If we were to reduce this, what would happen is it makes it red, because the default hue is 0, and 0 represents red. And if I turn on the real-time preview, which is right here, you'll know if it's activated based on that little bit of a glow right there. It makes it to where everything, it just like happens without me having to do anything, instead of it being frozen until I move this viewport and update it. So I kind of want a little bit of a light blue. So for a light blue, we probably want to go around 160 or so, 160, 170, 150. Okay, maybe 150 is what we want. And we need to crank up the brightness because this is just way too dark. Let's change the brightness from 64 to, let's just go really extreme and go to 256. It's actually not that bad, but it needs to be less blue. So we want to adjust the saturation. Light saturation to a value of 255 is white, as in there's no color in the light allowed. If we set this to something like 200, there's still some color allocated into it. So you'll see that the lower this number goes, the more color that leaks into it. And you can kind of see how this could allow for a lot of cool lighting. I'm going to set this to 150 because I think this is a really nice shade of blue. I'm not going to make it any brighter because we need a few more lights anyway. You know, kind of notice that in the corners of the ceiling here, it's a lot darker than it should be, and also it's dark in the corners, which we don't want. The first thing we want to do, we want to move this to the center. You can see the little, like a little red cross there. We want that to align in the center of the box in this particular case to give it some good lighting. And then do Shift D, and that's going to duplicate the light. And as you can see, I got way brighter. So we're going to move this over here into the corner, and then we could just do this a few more times. Okay, and now we have a room with way too much light. It is way too bright. How do we select all the lights? We could control click on all these 5 lights, but that's kind of annoying. In this particular case, because there's only 5 lights in the map, we can actually come over here, right click, and then go over to select, and select all lights. This selects every single light that is in this map, but because we've just started the map, there's only 5 lights. So as you can see, this updated and says 5 selected. So now we're changing the properties of all of these lights. So let's just tone this down to like 128. Now you can see that this looks significantly better, but we need to build it. So let's quickly come over here and build the map, and look at that. Wow, doesn't that look so nice? If you're getting annoyed by this red box, by the way, aka the brush, press B while you're in this viewport, and it toggles the view of this. You can check all of the keybinds for that right here. Some of them don't even have keybinds, but a few of these do, and you'll want to probably be using a bunch of these. Alright, so now that we have this map, we need to actually make it playable. So what we're going to do, we're going to come down here, and the first thing we need to do is add a player start. What you just do, you just right click, and it's already going to be here in the menu ahead of time. Cool, right? So now we have that. And you'll notice every single time I place down an actor, I'm always going to come in here and toggle this. This is just a habit that I have. It's a really good habit to have, but it's pretty annoying to do as well. But anyway, the main thing is that we would put this player start somewhere in the world. The location of this player start does not matter. In a lot of Unreal Engine 2 games, this would actually matter where this is placed, but in Shrek 2, it doesn't matter in any way. And in fact, you'll only be using this player start if you want to like start a map with an event, and that's it. But I would put this in a map regardless of whether or not your map starts with an event. It's just a really good practice. Now we need to add Shrek. You can add Shrek by right-clicking, and you will see that there's something called P Shrek. You might be confused. Why is it P Shrek? It turns out that this engine is really weird when adding additional stuff ahead of time. And as you can see, I added a ton of stuff here. All this stuff I added. But for some reason, if you don't have the letter P in front of it, then it all will just break. So just ignore that the letter P is there in the first place, and then click on it. And look at that. Shrek is now in the level. Isn't that crazy? Of course, I'm going to make him snap. And then you'll even notice that the properties menu over there on the right updates when I click on other stuff, which is really nice. So we want to move Shrek over here in the middle, and I'm using Control left mouse to move him around, just like I've shown. Now I'm going to come over here and click on Actors, Radii View, and would you look at that. So now we can see the collision of Shrek, which is really nice. So this map is actually playable in this state, so we're going to go ahead and do that. We want to come up here, click on File, and then click Save As. And you will come into here. You'll probably have a bunch of autosaves, which is really cool. So we want to go back one, and then go forward one into the Shrek 2 directory, go into the maps, and then we want to name this something that's pretty easy to get to right now. Name it anything you want, except for the word test. If you name this map test, the game will crash. I don't know why. It really hates the word test though, so don't do that. But ironically, you can name it numbers. So I'll just name this map 1. And then I will click save, and boom, the map has been saved. Now, if we load up the game, because I just loaded up the game, I need to type this just to get debug mode, and I'll show you why that's helpful right now. If you press C on your keyboard, this menu will come up, and you can see all of the maps in the game. And you can warp to these at any point, with the included ability to load into these with a specific G state. This is stuff you'll likely never use, but you might. There's also bookmarks. This is super helpful stuff, but I'll show that much later on. The main thing is that we have the number 1 in here. And of course, we named our map 1, so this is where it is. If we click on this and then click Go, it's going to load us into the map that we've just made. Wow, isn't that crazy? So now we can just run around the map and do literally whatever we want. Look at this gorgeous freaking map right here. So before we get into anything else, I need to show why having this game running and having the editor running is very helpful. So, here's all we have to do to make a change, alright? Now I have, in my defuser.ini folder, the one I showed you a little bit back, I have save game space 64 and load game space 64 bound to 2 different keys which stand for save slot and load slot, or save state and load save state. So if you want to modify this map in real time, the first thing you need to do is save and then load, alright? So you just loaded a save that you just made. So now you are playing on a saved version of the map. You're not playing on the original map in technicals. Now we can simply press escape and then just click back into the editor and we can make any changes we want right here. Alright, I just got to give you guys a little bit of a preface, alright? I'm adding this in between the tutorial because I was looking back at this and I was like, this is kind of incorrect. Alright, so what I was going to say in the tutorial is that to fix the brightness of every character and stuff, that you should come into the display and change the ambient glow. This is not necessarily the best option, and this is due to the fact is we need to increase the brightness for everything in the entire level. This is because all of Unreal Engine 2's lighting almost always needs additional lighting, no matter what. So by giving it a little bit of global ambient glow on top of the lights that are in the map, it can make everything look correct. This is FGM Office, but I removed all of the ambient glow off of everything. So you can see that everything looks very incorrect. What the developers try to teach you is that you should change the value for the ambient glow to be higher on everything manually. The quickest way is actually to come up here to view, click on view, and then click on level properties, then come into zone light right here, and you'll see something called ambient brightness. Change this to somewhere like, if it's an indoor map, probably a value of 32. If it's an outdoor map, or in some rare cases of an indoor map, set it to 64. As you can see, if I set it to 64, it's a little bit too bright. 32 or even 16 is probably plenty. And if I come up here and build the map, now you can see that this map looks a lot better than it used to. Of course, these lights are not calibrated to deal with the brightness that I just gave it, so you'd have to tone on the light in this map to work alongside the glow, but as you can see now, Shrek looks completely correct. One thing I should mention is that this does not completely disown the idea that you should just never do this. You should still do this, but this is if you need additional glow on top of the global glow that's already being added. So yeah, hopefully that clarifies everything. So for Shrek, you'll want to come into the display tab, and you want to change his brightness because, as you can see in game, he is very dark and he has a lot of shading around him, and we don't like that. So we need to give him some brightness. We can do that with the ambient glow variable. This goes anywhere between 0 to 255, with 255 being the maximum brightness and 0 being that he doesn't have any additional glowing. You will always want to set this to something. If you keep it on 0, he's just going to look bad in every map, unless it's a horror map in which everything's supposed to be dark. So let's just set this to like a quick value of 100, and look at this. We can click save, we come in here, and then we pull up the console, type RL, and wow, look at that, our changes have applied. Now as you can see, he's actually too bright, so we're going to do the same thing. Save load, come over here, we're going to set this to a different value. Maybe a value of 64 would be good. Click save, come back over here, and click RL, and boom, now the changes have applied. Awesome stuff, right? Now, I think that this lighting is a whole lot better for Shrek, so we're just going to stick with this. If you think it's a little bit bright or a little bit too dark, you can adjust it how you want. But yeah, we have now done it, so now we need to start working on more rooms, because this is a really boring room, and we could add a lot more to this if we wanted. Alright, so we're just going to do a really quick edit here. Now, hopefully I'm not going too fast for some people. I really hope I'm not, because that would kind of go against the purpose of the entire tutorial. Anyway, I'm going to come back over here, right click. Alright, so we want to make another room, alright? Let's just make a little quick hallway. Let's make it like a little bit of like an elbow hallway into another room, alright? But before we do that, let's actually change the texture to something that is a little bit more manageable and helps with learning how brushes work. Now come back over here. If you've opened up every texture package, you'll have this new package here named DevTextures. And you'll see there's some really cool looking textures here, and you might recognize this from Source Engine. Wow, that would be so surprising, wouldn't it, if it were pulled from there. Anyway, click on this right here, and wow, now everything is really weird looking because we have blue on orange. So let's just quickly change all of this. Again, we get to select all light because these are just all lights right now. And we'll just change this to maybe like 30 or so would be a little bit more orange. Build the map again. Okay, it looks pretty orange now, I would say. And also, if you guys think that it looks a little bit weird up here, move it down a little bit. I would say, yeah, I actually right there I think is where I would probably put the lights, so the ceiling doesn't look quite as weird. Build again, and yeah, that looks a whole lot better. So what's the point of having all these boxes here? You might actually think it's pointless. You would be wrong if you think that this is pointless. This actually helps with trying to figure out the size of how you should build everything. Every single one of these blocks is a 64 by 64 unit block. So, if we want to make a doorway, well, we take 64 times however many blocks, and then we just do that to calculate how far we want everything to go. Because I think a lot of people think really well in blocks. Kind of like in Minecraft. In Minecraft, it's super easy to build stuff because everything's on a block basis, right? But if you use the developer textures ahead of time, you could do this really easily. So while some people might be like, wow, you're in Source Engine, what lol? Just know that you're giving yourself a massive advantage with using these beforehand and then applying textures afterwards. So I want this to be 4 blocks, so we want the width to be, and this is a really cool feature about the cube builder. You do 64, and then times, and then you can insert the amount of blocks that are in there, which is really cool. Instead of having to like type the number 256 or something like that, even though it's a really easy number to get, you can type the amount of blocks instead, which makes it even easier to figure out how to calculate everything. And then let's make this hallway, let's make the hallway 12 blocks long. And then we'll make it 4 blocks tall again. click build. Wow, look at that. We just got a perfect brush. And then we can just move this over here and then move it down through this port. Haha, just kidding. You can't see because you probably have it toggled off, or maybe you don't. But I do have it toggled off. I toggle off the builder brush all the time. So as you can see, I can press B and bring it back. Alright, so we move the brush over here, and then we come over here and click subtract. Awesome, right? And of course, if you want to see it with proper lighting, click this, and now everything looks more correct. Of course, there's no actual lighting in here, so it's going to be completely pitch dark. Now let's create that elbow we were talking about. So while you could make another brush to change this, here's a little quick shortcut. If everything happens to work out, which in this case I purposely made it to where it works out, you can actually save a tiny bit of time if you happen to make your brush work for multiple usages. And as you can see, I could literally just move it there, click subtract, and then I just make the room again. Which, I don't know if you remember, but I did 1024 by 1024 by 1024. Click that. We can move this. Let's just move it like right here, alright? And then of course, move it up and align everything because why wouldn't you align everything? Click subtract. Heck, we could even take lights here in this room and we could just select all and then we can do a shift D on that to move them all. And because we set the grid at the very beginning, we can very easily move these perfectly over. In fact, because these have the grid setting applied to them, it's actually worth just moving these around rather than making new lights. And go down here and place some lights in here. When it comes to a room this small, by the way, it's usually more advantageous to put the light in the center because if it goes any higher up, it's going to make the ceiling look bad, and if it goes any lower, it's going to make... It's just, everything's going to be bad. You don't want lights to be super close to a thing of BSP. So yeah, let's just duplicate this and put this all over the place. We will have to adjust the brightness for this as well, though, because these lights are calibrated for a very big room. Let's build and get blinded, probably. Oh, actually, we didn't even get blinded by that. It's kind of crazy. And then let's control-click all these, because now, unfortunately, we can't do the cool thing where we just select all of the actors. And what I want to do, I actually want to make this hallway blue. Just because why not? It'll just simply look cooler. But we should come over here and reduce the radius to like 32 to tone it down a bit. And we go back to 160. And heck, we'll go to we'll turn down the saturation so we get more of a color out of this. And we want to click this and this. Now, why did I just click on two of these? Well, this is because this over here is a single brush, and this is a single brush. So now that I've selected one surface from each of these two brushes I've laid down, if I hit Shift B, it selects all the surfaces from this brush and this brush. So instead of having to click all of these, I can just do that, and it's really quick. So now we come back over to the texture browser. You can click whatever texture you want, but I'm going to click that one, because that one, wow, that is really blue. And we're going to build and see what that looks like. That is way too blue, jeez. Alright, that looks pretty good. You might be asking me, Master, why in the world are you leaving this up here? All of this is due to how Unreal Engine 2, this is all due to how the editor renders stuff. You won't actually see this in the game. And in fact, I'll prove that right now. I'll save my changes, come back over here, and RL, and look at that. Look at this gorgeous freaking map right here. Amazing stuff, right? Now we can actually just move around and do whatever. Really cool stuff. So what have we done so far? We've made 2 rooms, and we've made a hallway. So now at this point, you should generally know how to start making an indoor map with this kind of principle. Alright, let's add some basic volumes or even zones. But technically there, volume zones is very incorrect, but some people might call it that anyway. Let's add a barrier into the map like No Wonder did in every single map for seemingly no reason in some really dumb spots. Let's make a quick little cube right here. Let's just do a 64 by 64 by 64. We'll take this cube right here and quickly move it over into this room right here. We'll put it on our left, except we'll need to lower it down a little bit. And also this is a perfect representation of why these cubes are so helpful. It's just super easy to build when you're doing with it like this. Alright, so similar to how we can make a brush subtract into the world and whatnot, we can also make a brush add a volume. You go over here, right click on volume, and wow, look at all these freaking volumes we have here. Some of these volumes just simply don't work with Shrek 2. Some are coded for Shrek 2 and don't work. And then some are just really helpful that you probably want to use all the time. In this case, we are going to click KW blocking volume. So what is a blocking volume? A blocking volume is a volume that exists in a space that will prevent a player or even other things from going through it. That's the only purpose. Why would you pick the KW version? Well, because KW stands for No Wonder, and essentially what No Wonder did is they took the code for this and then essentially extended it and called it this. So that means that this is the exact same thing as this, except this has additional functionality, which is why you should almost always use the KW variants of everything, especially on certain things, which I'll get into later. So click on KW blocking volume, and you press B, so you toggle off the builder brush, aka the red box, and now you can see the volume exists here. For testing purposes, we're going to make this so we can see it in-game, because by default you can't see it. So in order to do this, just come over here and click on Advanced, and then click on Be Hidden, and toggle that to False. You can toggle this, by the way, by simply double-clicking it. An interesting thing, though, is that if you were to highlight two actors with a difference in these properties, it'll actually blank. But you can force both of these to have the same thing if you click on this drop-down in there and then click on one of these and it would override it. Obviously, you don't want to show a light. That doesn't make any sense. Alright, cool. So now we have a blocking volume. Let's make another volume, alright? Let's click on the same builder brush, move it over here a little bit, and let's try something different. Like, let's do a kill zone, alright? So, I know I've made a previous tutorial on how level editor works and all this, but this is brand new stuff. I've learned so much more about how the level editor works and fixed a lot of errors I've done back then. One of them being that I was using a physics volume for killing the player. Do not do this. This is the worst thing you can ever do. And this is because it's super incompatible with potions. And you can actually see this in No Wonder Maps, but no one actually bothered to test it for some reason. But this is actually a problem with normal No Wonder Maps. Yes, if you want to hurt the player, use the damage player volume. Or if you want to have even more functionality, use the damage player emboss volume. But I wouldn't really recommend using this because this can increase the file size of your map a little bit more than you'd want. And why does this matter? Because the higher the file size of the map is, the longer save and load times take. And obviously, you want the player to have the best experience with your map, more than likely, so don't do this. So we're going to click on Damage Player Volume, and that's pretty self-explanatory, to be honest. Basically, all it does is hurt the player, however much you specify right here. This is the only part that really matters right here. How much do you want to hurt the player? Well, the player starts with 100 HP, so if you want the player to just die immediately, you could set this to a value of 100 if you want them to die. If you want them to get hurt pretty bad, set this about any lower number, so I'll just set this to like the number 40 or something. And now, every single time we touch this, we're going to take 40 damage. Speaking of volume-specific properties, I never touched on the KW blocking volume. You can see that we have the ability to toggle the collision for specific kinds of actors. But for right now, we're not going to mess with this. But later, we will be messing with this barrier. And let's go ahead and add one more thing. Now, we're going to need a little bit bigger of a brush for this. So how many blocks is this? Let's just do... Okay, so we need this to be like 8 blocks wide. So that'd be 64 times 8. And then we do 64 times, I guess, 3 to make it this wide. And then we want to make this volume about the same height of the player. Should be 64 times 3. Alright, so what in the world could I be thinking of right here? Also, I'm not sure why I didn't mention this, but to rotate, instead of using control and left mouse to move it like this, you could use control right mouse and it'll rotate it, which is crazy. Anyway, let's move that over here, and now we want to place it down. And we're going to want to set this to a physics volume. Now, you might have just remembered the time where I was talking about how physics volumes are bad. They are, but this is currently the only way to make a conveyor that works correctly, so this is how you do it. But anyway, what could we possibly use a physics volume for? We're going to make it essentially act like a conveyor. So how can we do this? We're going to open up the physics volume tab, and you'll see that there is this thing called zone velocity, alright? So whatever we set in here is going to be the velocity that's set to any actor that is inside of it. So let's say we want it to move us in this direction. You see this little thing down here? Did you think it was useless? It's not. It's actually used for stuff like this. So as you can see, we're looking away relative to the X direction, and that's because the X is pointing towards us. If the X was pointing forward, that means that we're looking towards the X. But we are looking away from it in this case, so we need to apply a negative value to it. So we go over to X, and we want to type in like negative 50 or something. This is going to apply a velocity of negative 50 relative to the X axis. And I kind of forgot to make these visible, so I'm just going to do that real quick by clicking on both of these and then clicking or toggling Be Hidden False. And of course, before you ever play the map, you should build it and then save it. Alright, so now we're on the map, and we have our 3 volumes here. So let's check them really quickly. This is the blocking volume, and as you can see, it's doing a great job at just being a blocking volume. This is the volume that you would use for when you want to simply block a player from doing something in particular. And while some people would argue that barriers are really bad and should never be used, you'd actually be wrong. There are definitely times where you do have to use barriers in certain cases. And barriers also make it incredibly easy to add additional collision on top of certain models. So you'll definitely want to get used to barriers really quickly. This is the damage player volume, and if we walk into it, even if we fall into it, we will take damage. And just so Shrek doesn't keep on talking about how he's hurt all the time, pull up the console and type set health 100. And a little bit of a side note for that command is that command will get disabled if you save and then load, or you just load a save while on the map. And then we have this, and if we stand in it, it's gonna start moving us. Alright, let's add in some new actors. So, we could come over here and then simply find the actor that we want, alright? We could do that. To select an actor, simply click on the actor you want, and then you just right-click in the world, and it'll be right here. It'll be the very first result, and you can just simply add it. But yeah, this is the actor browser. Let's just go and select something like, let's get some coins, alright? So there's 3 ways you can actually select a coin, contrary to what a lot of people think. So the first way is that we could spend an hour trying to look through all the list of all this stuff, especially if you don't know where you're trying to look to find this coin. Which, if you don't know, all pickups are in the pickups tab. It's in KW pickup, SH pickup unlit, and then now you have all the pickups here, including all of the potions you can buy from the vendor. You can actually, they actually configure that so you can place them physically in the map, which is really cool. Yeah, so we could select coin here, but let's say we don't want to do that. So something that you could do is you could also right-click, and you'll see that it's already in this menu here. You can see I already have added it ahead of time because this is a very common thing you add. Let's say you don't even want to do that. Well, there's this little button down here that really no one uses for some reason, and it pulls up the log for this editor. And you'll actually see that ahead of time that there's already a bunch of stuff here where it says set current class, and then something. Well, fun fact, if you actually copy this, come down here, and then paste it, and then type the name of any actor in the entire game, you will actually select that actor. So if you already are a avid modder of the game, you know like all the actor names, which I doubt any of you do, but if you do, or you've learned everything and or have remembered stuff, then you're going to benefit so heavily from this, it's not even funny. Like so. So I have a mouse potion currently selected, but if I wanted to go to coin, simply type it right there with the quotes right there, and it will select it, as you can see. If it doesn't work properly, then this will not appear. Anyway, we can close this, right click, and you'll see that now it's here. So now we can place down coins. Wow, isn't that so cool? Of course, I'm going to add snap because I do that to everything. You might be wondering if we can get the collision for this to be visible at the top, and you'd be right. All these viewports have the exact same settings, so you can make it viewable through anything. We could just do this if we wanted. And here's a super helpful hotkey. You can hold Control Alt and then click, and you could do a highlight like that. And then you could do stuff like this really quickly. And now we have 16 coins in the level. We can just save it so we can build. And what the frick is this? Errors! What in the world is this all about? Master, how could you deceive us? How could... No, none of this matters. And I'm gonna quickly explain why these don't matter. So, take note of the message. No actor with tag corresponds to this actor's event. It's actually 100% correct that the engine is doing this, but the main thing is that this doesn't matter. Without getting too much into events, because we're not really at that point in this tutorial yet where I start talking about events, but essentially, on every single one of these coins, it has an event that it fires to when picked up, and that event is coin pickup. So it's freaking out over this because there's no actor with the tag of this event, which is why it does this. Essentially, this is just here just to say, hey, you have an event, but it's not actually firing anything. Are you sure this is actually correct? And this is a default thing, so yeah, essentially blame no wonder for this. This does not matter. You actually can get errors that do matter, but this is not one of them. Alright, let's add a few more actors. We could just add them through here. There's a lot of common ones in here. So why don't we do that? We could add Donkey into here. Wow, isn't that so cool? We just put Donkey right there. We could add an energy keg right here, and we could just put that and put it like, I don't know, like floating right here. A fun fact about some of these pickups is that some of them have this set in place. I'm not going to go over what all these variables do and whatnot, but this one's pretty obvious. B, bounce into place, which stands for can bounce into place, and this is set to true. It's only set to a few pickups, and this is one of them. So if we were to load the map, this would like fall, but I don't want this to fall, so I'm just going to toggle this off. There's some cases where you want this and some cases where you don't. But yeah, let's just save the map and play it. Wow, look at that. Isn't that crazy? So now we have all the pickups that we have added, including this, which is floating, which would not be floating by default. And we have Donkey, which I kind of forgot to give lighting. Let's just do that real quick. And I'm not sure if you noticed it, but I did not save and load. Of course, I probably didn't even show you that, but this is the error that you'll get. Couldn't save package, maybe file is read-only. This is actually correct. Because we are reading this in memory currently, it cannot override what we're currently doing, which is why we save load. And now if we click save, it's fine. Alright, so now we can come back and look at that, now we fixed them. So, if we want to switch between any of these characters, type in the console command SCTP, which stands for switch control to pawn, which is what Donkey is. And then his tag name, which is by default Donkey. And we can do that. And then we can switch back to Shrek if we want. We can switch back to Donkey. And if you're confused, I just checked through console history by hitting up on my arrow keys, and you can go back through the histories. Alright, so now that we have this really cool map, let's go ahead and add some models to it. So where do we pull models from? We pull it from right here. This is the static mesh browser. Don't get it confused with this, even though you'll probably be using this a bunch anyway. This is the prefab browser, but we want to go into the static mesh browser this time. And then we just want to simply come in here, open up everything with just clicking Control A, and then now we just have everything open. Let's add in something from factory because that's just kind of what we've been doing. We just maximize this, look around a little bit, and as you can see, there it is. And then we can just select a model from this entire pack. Now I'm not going to show every single model, but let's just use this model. So we have that selected, so we're going to right click, and then we want to click Add Static Mesh, and then boom, we just added in a bunch of lockers. Now unlike a bunch of actors, if you're doing my technique of constantly having everything snap, you don't need to do that on static meshes. That's just not how they just already have that by default. So we could take this and move it anywhere. We could put a bunch of lockers here, and then we can build the map, and wow, look at that. Now you're gonna notice that these lockers just look dark. They just look too dark. Similar to the ambient glow trick we use there. You should always use that on static meshes as well to make them properly stand out. It's a very important thing for mapping that you apply ambient glow to a lot of stuff to make it look correct. As you can see, now this looks way more correct than it did. And if we load it up in-game real quick, you'll see that it does look very correct, which is awesome. Let me just show you a few properties of static meshes really quick and tell you a few things about them. So, the static mesh, as it has it in its name, static. It is a static thing. You cannot change anything about a static mesh in real time without breaking stuff. And everything that's on it is just like, it can't change. Which means that none of these can move in any way. But these can also render really quickly, so it's really good to have the most amount of static meshes in your maps when it comes to models. Instead of like having a lot of like BSP. Like it's not really practical to carve out the world for a model. It's just not. Speaking of carving out the world, did you know you can add back into the world through carved bits? Let's do that real quick right now, just so I can show what it kind of looks like right there. So I'll just quickly add it. As you can see, here's the brush. And wait, that's like way too big. Wow, I did not want to make that big. I want to make it like 128 by 128 by 128. Let me put it in the corner and add a little bit of a block there. Heck, let's even add a little bit of a course right here. So we're gonna add it, and wow, so we're gonna add it, and I just set the texture to green. Don't worry about it. Heck, I could literally make a little bit of a course right here. I could even make some floating platforms. I can make this like 256 by 256, and I have a floating platform in the air. But there is one slight problem to doing this, and I'm about to show you that, and that's in fact why I'm actually doing this in the first place. So if I try building now, you're gonna notice that the lighting looks very incorrect now, alright? So this is the correct way to light up rooms, except for the fact that there's no lights down here, so we need to add some lights back down here. Instead of using like a cross with lights, because it's not recommended to do that when it's like this far down here, let's like put it like under the source, the main sources, and at which it's like catching all the light. Let's put it right there and just see what happens. What does it do to that? Alright, that's already a pretty major improvement. Let's just move that a little bit higher up. Alright, that looks pretty good, but the problem is that there's literally no light that's under these blocks. So we need to add an additional light for under there. A light that would go like right around there, more than likely, would look just fine. Except we need to adjust the brightness of this to be more like 64, so it doesn't look overly bright. Let's just demo all this in game real quick. Alright, so this is what everything looks like in game. I think this actually is a little bit too bright right here. Let's set this to a value of 96 instead of 128, and let's see if that makes it look any better. Alright, I'd say that looks significantly better. Of course, it doesn't look perfect, but this is pretty decent lighting. Well, freaking speak of the devil, kind of forgot. Alright, so let's take this light right here that we made, and let's add it at a few more parts of the map to make everything just pop a little bit more correctly. Let's add it right there for those surfaces, and then we'll add one back here on this side to make this a little bit more properly lit. Alright, cool. This room looks a little bit better. I'm not entirely too satisfied with the shading on these green blocks, but you can always tinker around with it on your own time and try to perfect the lighting to satisfy whatever need you want. I'll give you guys a little bit of a lighting life hack right here, right before we move on. It's really recommended that you take lights that are next to all this and make them the color of what's next to them, or similar, or even matching. So in this case, we want to change this to like 110 or something to make it green. And then we would like do stuff like this, where we just put a little bit of a green light on top of each of these platforms. Alright, so I tinkered the lighting a little bit more, and I think it looks a lot better now. This is how it looks now with the additional added colored lights that match the color of the texture that's next to it. And as you can see, it looks pretty nice, which is crazy. You wouldn't think that would be how you would solve that problem, but that's actually how you make everything look good in this engine. This engine can be incredibly colorful if you make it colorful, but it's hard to do so sometimes if you don't know what you're doing. Alright, let's go ahead and add some sound and ambience. Alright, so if we want to place down a thing that would create some ambience in a zone, we're going to right click and click on ambient sound. Of course, let's just make that snap because why not? And we'll put it in the middle of the room and raise it a little bit. Now, what sound do we want this thing to play? Well, let's go over to the sound browser. If you want to go to the sound browser, simply click on this right here. Let's have it play some alarm. As you can tell, that is going to be really annoying, so we're going to put it there. So to make it play that, you want to go to the properties, go to the sound tab, and then click on ambient sound, and then click use. As you can tell, this is not annoying whatsoever. I don't really know why anyone would do this in their map, but this is a great little example, and easily shows how this works. There's a bunch of properties here. I'm not going to get into any of these. These are all pretty self-explanatory. You can mess with these as you want. If we don't want this to play in the editor, just tick this. I sometimes have this on when making maps, but if you don't want to hear stuff like that, then just keep it off. Alright, let's save the map and then test it. Alrighty, so let's go over to the room where we made the sound, see if we can hear it. And as you can tell, the sound is here. We could definitely make the sound a little bit louder, but the thing is that with Unreal Engine 2, sound can only get as loud as the file was originally made, so you can't get any louder than that. Also, this blue room, I don't know about you guys, but I really like the aesthetic of this blue hallway. Of course, you wouldn't actually like put this in a map, like an official map, but this is still like, it just looks cool. So now that your map has sound, when switching back over to the editor, you might still hear the alarm sometimes. So if you want to prevent all sound from coming to the game, just minimize the game, and after about like 4 to 5 seconds, all sound will be cut out from the game entirely, including music. Just a nice little life hack there. Alright, we got a cool little level going here. Let's add some music. It is time to add music into the level. It's going to be freaking great. Alright, so we're going to want to go over here to the actor browser again. We're going to want to go down here to triggers. Oh my gosh, triggers. Now, I'm about to get really heavily into what triggers do, but all you need to know right now is that if you touch a trigger, it fires an event and or can activate something. This is like the core thing to all maps ever. And as you can see, there are tons of triggers that are made by No Wonder. But the main one that we want to click is the KW music trigger. And let's just minimize this and place it into the level. So simply right click add KW music trigger, and look at that. We've just placed a trigger with a music symbol on it. So if we click on this, you can actually see the collision for this. We're going to make this visible just for testing, and we're also going to make it snap. Let's move this to the top of the green platform that we placed up here. And let's also adjust the collision of it before we do anything to it, because you probably want to do that anyway. You might be like, wow, this is too small, right? We can make this a little bit bigger. We can make this like, give it like a radius of like 200, and that gives it a little bit of a circle. Alright, so now that we have a radius of 200 on it, let us pick a music track. So, you'll see this, it says song, and it's just blank, and there's like no use thing to. So, how we're going to do this, we're going to click on the music browser, and I'm actually just kidding. This music browser is actually freaking useless. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go over to your Shrek 2 directory that is inside of your Unreal Runtime 2 editor. So you want to go over to your Shrek 2 directory and then go into music. Alright, so you're going to have this little readme here. You could read this if you want, but you don't have to. Make sure that if you ever finish a thing that utilizes DevKit that you delete this, because obviously you don't need that in there. But we have a ton of files in here. Now what do all these files do? Essentially, if we were to run any of these, well, it plays some music. Wow. So if you click on any of these, it's gonna play a music track. These are all the music tracks in the game, plus additional ones that were actually hidden away. Such as this one right here. Wow. And then there's stuff like this, which is a track that you can normally never hear, even when you're going into this. And it's all sorted in a way where you should be able to generally find what you want pretty quickly. There's also other variations of it, like this. Heck, there are even some debug tracks, like this. It's a banger, right? Freaking music to my ears. Oh yeah, this is some music right here. This is where it is at. So yeah, you get the point. So let's pick out a music track from this. So I want this track to play as we get to the top. And this is just the hunt track. This is from Hunt 1. So we want to take this name and just copy it, come back over here, and then paste it in. And now you're basically done. There's this right here. If you don't want it to loop, you can do that if you want. You can also have it fade in and fade out all songs if you want. But yeah, let's save the map and then run it. Alright, so when we come to the top of this right here, we should hear music. And as you can hear, we do in fact have some music playing, which is great. And this music is just going to loop forever. So with that in mind, now you know how to pick out any music track you want. And I can tell you guys this much: when it comes to you trying to develop a new map or even a full game mod, which I doubt anyone would do, but if you were trying to do that, freaking adding in music ahead of time into a new map really helps you with building, I swear. Alright, let's quickly get into how you can do groups. Groups are something that you really need to do at the beginning of your map, and if you don't do it at the very beginning, you're basically just screwed. Essentially what groups allow you to do is speed up your mapping efficiency by a little bit, or in some cases by a lot, but again, you have to be doing it at the very beginning for it to actually be helpful. Let's just quickly get into grouping. We could do a super simple group if you don't want to like set up anything with these buttons down here. We could select all of these stack meshes and then hide them with this button right here. And this hides all actors that are currently selected. As you can see, I didn't actually hide it until I like updated this window by moving in it. That's how it works when I don't have this selected here. Yeah, these are hidden. But are these deleted? That is the question. Do you think these are deleted? Alright, so I just are on the map, and as you can see, even with the update, you could still see these in the game, but in the editor, you can't. So when is this actually useful? Well, it's generally useful for when you want to work through something. When a static mesh is in front of your view, and you want to work on something that's behind it, there's no way to do that unless you group it properly, or just temporarily hide it. This is a good way to temporarily hide it, and you could also make them all visible just by simply clicking this again, and that'll toggle everything back into view. But what if we want to make it more official? Well, then we can add it all to a group. Let's go over to the Groups tab up here. If we click on this, it brings up this cool little window that, oh, it's not actually that cool. It doesn't really have anything in it. Now, here is the nice thing about having groups set properly, is that you can select all and you could deselect all actors in a specific group, which is super helpful. But anyway, let's make a new group. Let's select an actor we want to hide first, or select a group of actors we want to hide like this. Go back over here. Click the little piece of paper that says new group, and then name it lockers. Hit enter, and now we have the ability to toggle these on and off with the click of a button. So these are on, I can click this, and now they're off. There's one set to none, which just sets the visibility of everything on or off, which is very rarely helpful, but yeah. Anyway, now you know how grouping works. Alright, let's make a skybox. Oh my gosh, skyboxes. We're gonna make the ceiling a freaking sky. So how are we gonna do this? We need to make a skybox room, alright? Let's make a room that is 512 by 512 by 512. That's a skybox room. I've done 256 in the past, but this can make the clouds not look quite as good when you do that, because they're like scaled up. So let's just move this somewhere. For the sake of this map, I'm gonna move it really close to the map, but normally you would move it pretty far from the map. Level it, and now let's subtract it. Now we have a room here. I don't really care about this texture, to be honest, yet. But anyway, so we need to clarify that this particular zone, because that's what this is a skybox. Now, do you guys remember when I was talking about zones? Well, when you don't have any zones, everything is white. But watch what happens if I try building the map now. Look at that. This has a different color than this. This is a different zone, and this is a different zone, alright? Which is good. So I'm going to switch to the texture view so I can actually see in here. We want to come over here, and we need to clarify that this specific zone is a skybox. So we wanted to click on sky zone info, and just to clarify, I know some people I've talked to didn't know about this, but something that is a drop down doesn't mean that it's not an actor. Like this right here, you might think that zone info is not an actor. This is actually an actor that you can use. And these down here are forks of this one, which essentially means that this has all the code of this plus additional stuff. And you could use that logic for literally everything. So anyway, click sky zone info, right click, add it. Now we want to make this snap. Now it's very important that we make this snap, put it in the middle of the room, and this is, okay, so essentially in the very center of this texture is where the game is going to think that we are looking it through, essentially. But we want this place to look like a sky, of course. It is a skybox after all. We need to add a dome into here. So they have a model that's already in here. I would just use this every time. Despite what this texture is, just use this every time. Add the static mesh. As you can see, it's pretty freaking big. You want to make this a little bit smaller. You can do this by adjusting the draw scale of it, or you can adjust this. This is just if you want to adjust how big or small it is on a certain axis, like so. Alright, so we want to make this like 0.49, I believe, is what we would want it to be. That looks pretty correct. And let's make this room use this texture. You might be confused. What did I just do? Alright, so this is the texture browser. This is where you can get all the textures right. But there's also another tab that's called In Use. And this shows every single texture that is currently being used. So we can click this, and now we just have a room that's a bunch of clouds. And if I were to click on this, you can see that everything is very slowly moving. In fact, I'll put my cursor here just so you can kind of see it. It's very subtly moving. So this skybox room is currently pitch black. We need to add some light into it, and we're going to do that with full bright. We want to click on this and set be unlit to true. And then for these textures right here, we want to do Shift B, right click, go to surface properties. And as you can see, we have this cool little thing here. Now, there's some little descriptions here that tell you how everything works, but we want to set this to unlit, and now everything should be visible no matter what. Sorry, I just came back to this after a little bit in the footage, but I just now realized that I left this down here. I want to bring this up a little bit because the skybox is, like, you see everything through the skybox through wherever this point is. When you have it that low, you can see the bottom of the skybox, and that just looks really weird. So yeah, keep it like a little bit like up here. Now we want to come into here and make certain textures appear like the skybox. So in this case, we want to make this and this texture show the skybox. So now that we've selected those two, let's right click, go to surface properties, and click fake backdrop. Now build the map. When you do a full build of the map, you should notice that these textures become unlit. So what we need to do is press K. And if you see some clouds, then you've done everything correctly. Let's make sure this actually works in game though. So let's save it and load it. So as you can see, now when we come in here and we look up, you can see the sky. So now we have a map with a sky, we have some music in here, we have some ambience. We are really getting along with this map so far. Now I should tell you guys about something. As you can see, this game is kind of weird when it comes to BSP, and as you can see, this actually just got darker for no reason. So let's go back here and check if that is the case, and it is in fact the case. So stuff like this can be caused by a number of things. The first thing you should do is make sure that this right here is not causing it, which means take it and move it back a little bit farther and kind of just mess with it a bit and see if that changes it. Oh yeah, and I also forgot to mention, when you had the skybox visible and you go out, you have this happen. Press K and that's gonna fix that. Let's build all and see if that fixes this error. Yeah, okay, it did. Yeah, so as you guys can see, sometimes the engine can be just really weird with how lighting on BSP works, so you just have to be really careful. In that case, it was quite literally having the skybox in this specific spot actually broke this. Now, while I can't exactly explain why, I highly recommend that you try to split your map up in edits. Like, maybe this is version 1 of the map, this is version 2, this is version 3. Having stuff like that can prevent dumb stuff like this from happening. Alright, let's go into the map and make sure that this is fixed. And as you can see, now all the lighting in this room looks correct. Awesome. Alright, let's get into triggers real quick here. Already have shown the music trigger up here, but now we're going to use just a base trigger. So, come over here, click on this, go to triggers, and then click on this. Actually, just kidding. That is incorrect. If you thought that was what you're supposed to do, you are very sorely incorrect. If you guys remember, I had previously said that if there is a KW variant of anything, use it. Guess what there's a KW variant of? Well, the trigger. Now, why is this important? Well, I'm going to quickly place down a trigger, and then I'm going to place down a KW trigger. And let's just look at the differences real quick. So here's what it normally looks like in here, and here's what it looks like with this. You guys notice how there's some properties missing, especially this one right here? So yeah, select this, or additionally, you could right click and the trigger is already here, but you could use this if you want. Click on that, and now we have a trigger into the map. Just as a word of warning, do not use a base trigger in the map. I can't emphasize that enough. If you're using base triggers in your map, you're already losing as a mapper. So yeah, I'm just gonna say it again. Use KW triggers. Use KW triggers. Use KW triggers. It's so important that you use this. I can't even stress it enough, and it won't even make sense to you guys for a while. But just know, use KW triggers. Alright, so what do we want to do with this trigger? Well, we want this trigger to activate something. So what a trigger does when you hit it is it fires an event, and it comes from the events tab. So as you can see in here, there is an event, and currently it's bound to nothing, which is what none means. We want to bind this to something. When it comes to these triggers, you can also give it multiple events as well. You can add it into an array where you can click add, and now we can fire 2 events with one thing, which can be really helpful, but we want to just use a single event. So let's make this interact with this in some way. This is the KW blocking volume. Let's rename this as something that isn't just literally the class name. Let's name this to test1. And then let's copy the tag of that to this. So what did we just do? We essentially just imagine that we just made an arrow that starts from here and ends here. And that arrow is pointing towards this volume, obviously. We have essentially connected them. So whenever we activate this trigger, it's going to send an event to anything with the tag of this exact thing. And in this case, the only thing in the map that has the tag of test1 is this volume. Alright, so what can we make this do? Well, we can make it toggle everything. And as you can see, it already has a variable in here that says does trigger toggle, and this is set to true by default. Let's just set all these to true as well. This essentially means that all of the collision properties of this are going to get toggled when an event is fired to this. Alright, well, that's basically all we need to do. Let's just save it and run it. Alright, so we have a trigger in here. So the collision of this trigger is about the size of the trigger itself. It's just the default size. If I touch this right now, it's solid. But if I hit this and walk over here, now the collision is toggled off for this. And if I run back here and hit it again, it's going to toggle it back on. And I can do this as much as I want. What if you want this trigger to only fire off one event? Well, what you can do is you can come down here to the trigger property, and there's something called B, trigger only once. Set this to true if you want to send one event once and never fire anything ever again, no matter what you tell it. Or set it to false if you want it to be able to be fired an infinite amount of times. In this case, for this example at least, we're going to want to set that to true and then save. Right, so now what should happen is we should hit this once, walk over here, hit it again, and we should still walk through it. And as you can see, we walk through it. No matter what we do, we cannot interact with this trigger any longer. Okay, so now with all that being said, you should now understand how exactly you can have an actor fire an event to something which can cause something to happen. Note that not everything can be affected by an event, and note that not everything can fire an event at all. This is just kind of stuff you have to mess around with. The fact that you can constantly just switch back and forth in between game and editor this quickly, well, you could probably see why experimenting would be super fun. Alright, let's do something more fun. Let's toggle this back off for this example, and we're going to add a counter. A counter is located in the triggers, and a counter is very helpful. I'm going to come up here, it's in just triggers. I'm going to click on counter, alright? And counters, their only job is just to count, and if you hit a specified number, then it fires something. So, what does this mean? It means that we could essentially connect this trigger to this counter, which then is connected to this, alright? And we can make that so that we have to hit this trigger X amount of times before we can toggle this. So in the counter, there's a thing over here, and you can change this to whatever. I don't believe that these actually work at all, but you can experiment if you want. But anyway, the main thing to focus on is the number to count, alright? So, essentially, what this is how many times can I take an event until I have to fire an event myself, alright? So, we want to name this test1. The counter, let's just name this counter1 and link it here, alright? So now what we've done, we've basically just added a middleman into firing an event. which is really cool. So this is set to a value of 2, which is fine. Let's just save it and run it. Alright, so the counter exists here. I just haven't shown it, which by the way, if you want to be able to see it, type show all without a space and then show all with a space, and you can see literally everything in the entire map. But I don't really want to see everything, but yeah, as you can see, the counter is there. Alright, so right now, I'm being blocked with this barrier. If I hit this trigger once, I should go through, but as you see, I don't actually go through it anymore. So you might think everything broke. If I go through this again, we've just fired an event for the second time, which means we fired 2 events to the counter. The counter has now been forced to fire its event that we just told it to, and now we walk through it. Now, with this being said, we cannot reactivate the counter. A counter is a one-time thing, and it can never be done afterward. Alright, let's add some auto jumps in. So, simply right-click. An auto jump is already added in ahead of time, but you can search it up with jump magnet, or you can use the thing I told you with the set current class. Class equals, in quotes, jump magnet if you want to quickly select it. And boom, there is the jump magnet. So we can just move this to wherever, and well, I suppose to some people you probably don't know what this actor is, so I'll really quickly explain it. You probably know that in Prison Steed, when you right-click to jump, it forces you to jump in a very specified way, and it only works if you're looking towards it. So we want to implement that into our test map. Let's go ahead and do that. So, as you can see, we have this visible right here. Make sure that you have Red-Eye View on, which again, if you haven't already seen it, is right here. Click this on, because if you don't, you can't see the radius of this, and this is incredibly important for this specific actor. So let's adjust the collision size of it through these 2 numbers right here. This adjusts the height and this adjusts the radius. It's generally good to make the radius of this thing relatively big. I'll set it to a value of 250 because that should be good enough. And we need to be able to hit this from the bottom. Just make it right around where the floor is. And now let's just copy and paste this to the other spots because this configuration is probably going to work. Actually, it's not. I need to actually increase that a little bit. And then add another one here. And then add another one here. Alright, so what we just did was auto jump noting. So now, whenever we look at these blocks and jump, it's going to force us to jump to it. There's an interesting property with these as well, where you can actually change the jump time, aka how long it takes for you to land on it. When you reduce this, the problem is that it actually makes your jump a lot more direct. If we set this to a value of 0.1, saved, and then went back into the game, what's going to happen is that we're just going to fly to it at crazy speeds. So obviously you don't want that. So set this to something more like 1.25, and that's probably good enough. Now let's run it, right click, and as you can see, the character now perfectly jumps exactly where we put the targets at, essentially, because that's basically what jump magnets are. They're just targets for stuff. Alright, let's add some AI nodes and some peasants, because why wouldn't we add peasants? We're going to go in here, and I'm just going to show the path to getting to all this kind of stuff, like peasants and enemies and stuff. So, you want to go into pawn. If you're going for enemies, you go to KW pawn native, and if you're going for just about anything else, it's more than likely an SH prop static, but that's not always the case. Like switches and buttons and hazards and stuff like that. Yeah, going to KW pawn native, KW pawn, SH character, SH enemy, and here's generally where all the enemies are in the game. You can see that there's the peasant here. If you just want a generic peasant, then just hit peasant tough, and then we're good. Let's add a peasant over here. Wow, look at that, we have a peasant. Of course, we need to make him a little bit brighter, because otherwise he's not going to look correct. And while it's cool and all that we just added a peasant into the map, what we need to do is we need to give this map AI nodes, because without AI nodes, this AI has zero clue as to how to navigate the map to reach you at any point in time. For this example, we need to make him run to you for quite a while, because otherwise he'll probably run back here. So you can adjust the radius at how far the peasant will run towards you before retreating with this little thing right here. If you change both of these to the same thing, if you change this to a higher value, then whenever he runs that far away from his original spawn point, then he'll run back. Anyway, not that that matters. As you can see, there's a lot of properties in here. You guys can mess with that as you want. But now we need to add AI nodes into the map. So right click and then click path node, and then immediately add grid snap to that, because you're going to regret it if you don't. So essentially what we need to do, we need to add a node for every single spot in the map where an AI could potentially be behind a wall while they're trying to run to their target, alright? And I'll just quickly explain this right here in game. So over here, if we have the peasant over in this part of the map, alright, and he's trying to run to me, if he started running to me and I was back here, we have a wall separating me and him. Now he cannot directly run towards me because that's all AI wants to do. They want to run directly towards the target and start attacking the target. They can't do this when you're like this. So they would need a node in order to know how to get to you, alright? If the peasant was right here, because he cannot run directly towards you, he would need to do something more like, well, before I can get to him, I need to run over here, and then I can probably see him at this point and then attack him, right? So you need to add a node in every case where they could be blocked, and this prevents all issues. So in this case, we need a node right here, 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 and here. And then probably one right here, just in case somehow he can hide behind here. And another one that's like right here, just in case the character gets hidden behind here. And actually probably another one here. So I'll just quickly add all those right now. Alright, so now we just added all those nodes. So if I build the map, you're going to notice that nothing really changes. But if I right click here, go to actors, I'm done. If you go into view and then click on paths, you'll actually see that a bunch of paths have now been created. And it all looks fine and dandy, except for this. Now, this cannot be resolved, unfortunately. Now, here's something to note, is that on the 2021 build of the editor, every single pickup in the game has an AI node on it. And you cannot toggle these off, no matter what you do. So if you're smart, it'd actually be suggested to, if a coin or something like that is in place of where an AI node would be, don't add AI nodes because coins will work just fine for it. This is a pretty rough case though, and this is not something you should ever do in a map, is have an instance like this. If you don't remember, I already showed off stuff like volumes and stuff, but there is a volume in here that is called the path blocking volume. If a path blocking volume obfuscates the view between a point here and then a point here, just like anything like that, it disconnects them. So with that in mind, although I'm not going to do that here in this example, you would want to do that if you want to split nodes. Anyway, let's save the map and run it. Right, so if we come over here to the peasant, he's going to see us and he's going to run to us for a while. Now the problem is that if I run over here, he would actually not know what to do. As you can see though, if I run over here, he's still following me. You see that? He's taking the nodes that I just put down there, and now he's just located where I am. But you can even see that he's taking the exact path. He's taking those exact nodes that I placed there. So the AI will only work as well as your nodes are placed. And also another command, if you wanna easily like see how they're all working, do R mode 1, and this enables wireframe. If your map is very well optimized, you won't be able to see stuff over there like that. But in this case, because we've done no optimization, we can very easily see exactly what he's doing at all times. And you could even see that he's using them all the time, especially like if I run all the way over here, it's like I don't know how to reach him. Oh, and now I can directly run towards him. Essentially, you need to place a node where if an AI were to run to that node, he could run directly towards you and have no issue. Alright, so now you should know how AI nodes work. Right, let's add a bounce pad into the map. Now, where exactly? I guess I'll add one at the bottom to bring us to the top, because that's kind of cool. So, I'm just going to show a prefab of this really quickly, just because I haven't really been talking about prefabs. There's a lot of prefabs that are helpful, of course, but there's even this one right here that's literally just a bounce pad and a target, which is what we're going to pull anyway, so I'm just going to pull them right here. You could simply right-click and then click on Add Prefab, but I'm actually not going to do that. I'm just simply showing that it's there. If you want to do that, you can. What we're going to do is we're going to manually locate it. I could also search for it, but I'm not going to do that. Just so you guys start to learn how to search everything manually. So to do that, it's in pawn, and then bounce object, and then bounce target and pad. We need to add in the bounce pad first. And then we need to add the target, which is the location that the player is going to end up once they hit a specific pad. Alright, so here's the target. I'm going to move the target right there. And as for the bounce pad, well, the bounce pad's actually doing pretty well. I'm actually just going to leave the bounce pad right there, and I'm going to make it, and I'm going to unhide it. So, we need to connect these. Do you guys remember when I was telling you about how events and tags work? The exact same principle is applying here, where we simply need to connect this through an event. Let's just name this target1. And then go over here and name the tag target1, and then boom. If you want to adjust how the bounce occurs, there are some properties that are in here, such as are you allowed to move while jumping, which is a little bit buggy because this means you can take fall damage during this. There's like be enabled, which is used for when you want to toggle a bounce pad on and off. There's the time to hit the target, Then there's these other two, which I'm not entirely sure if they actually do anything. Time to hit target is how long it's going to take from the moment I hit this bounce pad to the moment I land at this target. Let's do something cool though. So let's take this off right here, rename this to bounce pad 1, and then connect this through this instead right here, and make it to where when we hit this trigger twice, it'll enable this. Save it and run it. Right, so you can see the bounce pad right there. If I hit it right now, nothing will happen. So I need to hit this once, and then I need to hit it again. And now when I hit this, it's going to launch me all the way up there, and I can't input anything during that as well. I have zero control of whatever the frick I do. Nothing is going to happen. If I were to quickly go over here, and I could just toggle this like super quickly as well. It's not even hard for me to do it. I just go over here to bounce pad, can move while in the air. We RL, hit, and now when we hit this, we can move around and do whatever we want. And as you might know with how events work, if you want a bounce pad to be like a spider web or something, you would make the spider web fire an event to the bounce pad, which then fires an event to the bounce target. And that's how you connect them all. Alright, let's quickly add in some movers. Movers are static meshes that have the unique property of moving, which as you might imagine means that the performance will go down a little bit because of it, but they also have the ability to move, which is really cool. So, we need to select a model that we want to move. Let's have a crate move. Can I find the crate? There it is. Let's select that. And we don't want to right click and place down a static mesh. What we want to do is actually right click on this right here and click KW mover. Alright, and that adds that. So this mover is going to be placed wherever your builder brush is. And there we go. So let's just put this anywhere on the map. Let's put this like here, alright? And we want this crate to move over to this square if we hit this trigger once, alright? So first off, let's just connect it real quick with KW mover 1. Have this fire to that. Also, that's completely black, so we need to do a build on that to make it visible. So to set up a mover, we need to set keyframes down, alright? So the first keyframe is obviously where it is, alright? So a keyframe is a point that a thing can be at, alright? So keyframe 0, as the engine refers to it as, is where it starts, alright? And keyframe 1 is where we want to move it to. And then if we add any additional keyframes, it would just be where else we want to move it to. So let's go in here and go into the mover tab. There's a lot of settings here, so you can really customize how exactly you want your movers to work. These are quite integral to Unreal Engine, as you might imagine, so you'll be using these a lot. So this is important, and this is important. So this is the current keyframe number that it's on, which in this case is 0, and this is the amount of keyframes it should look through. Now keep in mind that you can only set, I believe, 8 keyframes. Yeah, only 8, because you have to include 0. But yeah, the way to start, we need to click on this, alright? So we just set a keyframe to where it is exactly, alright? And then we need to come over here and set the keyframe to 1, alright? And now we need to set where the keyframe is going to be, alright? So we've already set where keyframe 0 is. Now we set where keyframe 1 is, which is right here. Now we right click on it again and click key 1. Alright, so now we just set the keyframe there. Now if we set this back to key number 0, we can toggle between the positions. Awesome stuff. So you might notice that there is a shadow that is right here. We don't want that shadow at all due to this being on the ground. So what you want to do is go into display real quick, and you can turn off shadows with B Shadowcast. You can do that. Additionally, if you want the lighting to look better in some cases, you can tick this on, and essentially what this says is build the lighting on top of this model and then don't change the lighting in real time. This is set to false because since this can move, it makes more sense that the lighting changes in real time. But of course this also affects performance, so do it at your own discretion. So let's set the key number back to 0, and let's test it in game. Of course, after doing a build. Alright, so now when we load in, you can see that there is a crate here. Not doing much yet. If we hit this, it's going to move over to that. Oh my gosh, look at how crazy that is. And if we hit it again, it's going to go back and whatever. It's really cool, isn't it? It's actually so satisfying how it just perfectly fits up with these like little blocks here as well. It's really nice looking. But yeah, now we can move this wherever. Now, as you probably already saw, there are tons of properties, and I would honestly just say, just experiment with these. There's so much you can do, and it's just so fun to just mess around with these and whatnot. Now keep in mind that some of them just won't do anything, but they are really cool to do. Also, be sure to check this right here, the initial state of the object. It's set by default to be trigger toggle, which means that any time an event is fired to it, the mover is toggled. If we set it to like pound or whatever, that means that essentially we take a button and we just slam it and we just hold it there forever, which means that this would be constantly going back and forth. And you can mess around with the rest of these. Yeah, trigger toggle and trigger control are generally the best ones. And speaking of initial states, triggers also have states, and you can fire events to triggers, in fact, to toggle them on and off with this right here, which we could do a quick example of that right now, actually. Let's take this trigger right here and just copy it over, and let's make this trigger turn on this trigger, which allows us to hit that, alright? So we need to make the initial state of this other trigger turns on or other trigger toggles, alright? Now, I personally prefer the toggle because the toggle gives you a lot more freedom, but turn on if you want to be simple. I'll keep it on toggle right now, but you should turn it on more than likely. And come down here, and now we want to set the state of it. Do we want this trigger to be on at first or off at first? Well, we want this to be off because we want this trigger to activate this trigger. So let's connect this. Just simply set this as KW trigger 1 and then have it fire to that. And then we save it and try it. Alright, so now we have two triggers here. If I hit this, nothing is going to happen anymore, alright? But if I hit this trigger and then hit this trigger, it's now going to work. But if I hit this trigger again, now this trigger is disabled. So you can use states to really make your map really powerful if you know what you're doing. Alright, let's add a quick enemy spawner. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and use a prefab for this because spawners are a little bit annoying to set up, but I've already gone to the liberty of setting up how to do this. You can attempt to learn this later and how exactly it works, but for the sake of just showcasing how everything works, I'll use this. In fact, it'll also show how prefabs work. So as you can see, I just spawned it in right there, and cool. Alright, so this comes with 3 actors. This comes with the KW trigger, it comes with an enemy spawn director, which is how everything gets spawned, and then the enemy spawn point, which is where everything does get spawned at, alright? So this fires an event to this. Now I forgot to mention, this is bound to bandits. We'll just keep it on bandits because I'm totally fine with just spawning bandits. So, you see it takes an event, and it fires it to this right here, alright? And you can see it has a group name of Bandits 1. So due to the fact that this has the group name of Bandits 1, it actually connects with this. So despite this not actually firing an event to this, because this has special code, the group name will connect this to that. Then you have all this right here. You can configure this as to whatever you want. This is just like some properties of the enemies that are going to be spawned in real time. If you're confused as to why bandits are here in the prefabs, it's because you cannot just place a bandit. I don't know if you guys ever realized in the game, but a bandit cannot just simply exist and it be attacking you. It's not possible. You have to spawn them in real time, which is why this even exists in the first place. Oh yeah, let's just like quickly configure this. So let's make it to where only 1 bandit spawns and 3 can spawn, alright? And then I already moved the trigger over here, so that's like an ambush. Let's save it and run it. Now if I come over here and hit this, 1 bandit is going to spawn, and I can kill everything. Awesome. And then once that bandit dies, another bandit spawns. A really cool thing about these spawners here is that this, like the spawn point actor, actually fires an event every single time that an enemy dies from it. So you can only imagine the power that you have with counters and the fact that this can fire events to other things, and it just gets freaking crazy sometimes, the amount of power that you have with events. Alright, let's make a ladder and a shimmy pipe. Alright, so this is going to be a little bit more advanced. So if you haven't already started messing around with the editor, I suggest you do that before you continue watching this tutorial. This is where stuff's going to start getting a little more advanced. Not a lot more advanced, that's even farther in the tutorial. Alright, so let's make a ladder and a shimmy pipe. So, let's start off with the ladder. The first thing we're going to need is PIB, because PIB is the only person who can climb this properly without any issue. So let's just spawn PIB, make him snap, and then just move him over here. Now, I've got to mention something. Despite the fact that our map is not broken when we've loaded into it, if we were to spawn PIB, Donkey, and then Shrek into the map, the entire map would break. And as well as that, Shrek also needs to exist in every map, alright? The proper way for multiple characters to be in a map, you need to go into the player control tab, and there is a boolean called B is main player. This is set to true for whoever is the main player and set to false for everyone else. So that means that we set false to those, and Shrek is going to be true. Alright, so this is what it looks like, and as you can see, they also look at me now, so you can already see that the game definitely likes it a whole lot more when you actually set these properly. Alright, so we have PIB in the map. I just changed its brightness level, don't worry about it. Now we're going to add a pipe into the map. So let's go back into here and get a pipe model so we can get a little bit of a ladder going. Is that it? Alright, this appears to be the model that we want to use, so let's place this over behind us right here. Place a static mesh right here. As you can see, the static mesh is just, oh my gosh, it's just beyond ruin. Let's get into another tool you can use. Look at this up here. You have actor rotate. You use control and then left mouse, or left and right mouse to dictate what direction you want to rotate in, which is really nice. So I'm just going to rotate it right there, go back to the camera movement. If you essentially want just the base tool, use camera movement. You'll be using this one like 90% of the time anyway. Oh yeah, and I also got to rotate it. Okay, cool. So now that we've rotated it, we need to make it bigger. So we probably need to make it like 3 times bigger globally. And then we might want to make it a little bit taller. I just realized that it's pointing down and not up. Alright, so I just fixed that. Let's move that a little bit into the wall right there. And let's put a little bit of a grading up there before we start working on this, because we needed a platform to actually get to. Alright, so now that we have this really weird looking ladder, we can now make it to where we can climb up it. We are going to use a volume for this, which means we need to make a brush for this. So we need to make this about the size of the ladder. So let's make it around, well, how many blocks is that? It's around 7.5, so let's do 64 times 7 plus 32. As you can see, you can give it equations like this, and it's just gonna roll with it. And then let's make this probably 32 by 32. Build it, and let's see what volume we just got ourselves. Is this the volume that we need? It looks like it is. And I just realized that we're kind of getting to the point where the grid size might matter. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll see this grid size right here. We can toggle the grid entirely with this. I recommend always keeping this on, but there are some rare cases where you don't need it on. And this is rotation snap, and then this is the grid size itself. You change it to any of these numbers, but I recommend 8 or 16. Anything below 8 is kind of a little bit odd and harder to work with, so yeah. And if you can get a grid size of 32 to 64 to work, especially if you're working with just like BSP brushes, use like something like 64 or 128 really. Although 64 would be the best one because we're dealing blocks of 64 anyway. Alright, so now that we have this brush here, we want to place the volume here. Simply make a ladder volume. So you can see that whenever we select it, the arrow like that was originally there disappears. You don't want to have it selected currently, but as you can see, the arrow of the volume is pointing away from the ladder. We need to make it point towards it. We want to go into ladder volume properties, go into wall direction, and adjust the yaw of it. Okay, so this works in values of 65,535 or something like that. So essentially, something like 32,768 is like the halfway point for the yaw. So if we deselect, now it should, yeah, now it's pointing towards it. All right, cool. And I guess the last thing we need to do is we need to make this mountable. I didn't mention how to do this, but essentially there's a boolean here in the advanced tab that's called B is mountable. Set this to true if you want a model to make you mount. If you don't want a model to make you mount, and rather a thing of BSP, then what you need to do is you need to make a volume for it, which I can quickly do. There's like this one right here. So that's a 128 by 128 by 128 cube. But then let's like slightly extend it outward from that so that the player can actually touch it. And then let's just put that like on this one in particular. And let's also remove the auto jump, because fun fact, if you use an auto jump and then mount onto something during that, you will basically just be screwed. Alright, so move right there. You can see that it's kind of poking out from that. If we right click and then click on mount volume, now this is mountable. Alright, let's build all and see what we've just got ourselves. Alright, so if we come over here, let's see if this works properly. It does, in fact, work properly. Awesome. What about the ladder? Does the ladder work properly? It does, in fact, work properly. That is awesome. So, a ladder will only allow you to climb it when you're looking at wherever the arrow was. So, obviously, we can't climb it unless we're right here. Let's see if we can actually get up. No, we can't actually get up, so we're going to want to move that grating down a little bit so we can mount onto the grate before we get stuck there. Alright, on second thought, I'm actually just going to replace the pipe model entirely, so we're just going to use this. You can see that it's the color yellow, which I'm not really a fan of. But anyway, this is actually a great example. I'm going to show exactly how to replace this. You want to first click on the model that you want, click on the static mesh that you want the model to be replaced for, go into the display drop down right here, and then click on static mesh, and then click on use, and that's going to change the static mesh entirely for it. You can see that the rotation was actually correct for that though. So we want to go into the movement, go into the rotation, and just zero both of these so it defaults the rotation back to where it was. Also, the draw scale is much bigger, so we're going to switch that back to 1, move that back a little bit, and, well, you're probably noticing a problem here is that this is the correct size forward, basically, but we need it to be a little bit taller, so we can use the Z size and input it to, like, something like that. Which that's a little bit extreme. I can probably lower it a little bit. Yeah, never mind. That's a little bit extreme. Let's just put it down there. And then move the platform down here. And then we want it so that the player is going to mount this right as they get there. And now you're noticing a new issue is that this volume is too high. So how can we adjust the size of this volume now? So you see there's kind of like points right there? So what we're going to do, we're going to go over here to the vertex editing tool. And this is used for whenever you want to adjust where points are, alright? So let's come over here to the front view and let's do the Control-Alt-Click method, and that's gonna highlight all of these vertices here. If you want to be able to easily see the vertices, you can click on that, or even over here. It's much easier to click on the vertices, otherwise it's fine. And then we just want to simply move it down a little bit, move down like right here. It got a little bit misaligned, but as you can see, we can adjust that very easily right here, and we can realign it correctly. Right, and before we do it, we need to move this over just a little bit so it's more in the center of this. And now let's run it. All right, let's see if we go up it. We do, in fact, go up it, and we climb. Awesome. So, depending on how you configure your ladder, will basically tell how often you'll grab it and what causes you to grab it. Some ladders are just simply better than others, so the more you configure your ladder, the better it'll work. Like right now, I can't just run up to it, so this isn't like not really that great of a ladder. But if you configure it enough, you'll more than likely get a ladder up and running. But that's the basic principle behind getting a ladder to work. But I do want a shimmy pipe, so we're gonna add that. All right, so as for shimmy pipes, all right, this is where stuff gets a little bit annoying. But unfortunately, there's a DevKit here, so you know that speeds up the process a lot. Go to System, go to Cutscenes, and down here you're going to see that there is something called DevKit Shimmy Pipe Fix. So you might be wondering, why is this here? The thing is that the editor cannot do this, but INT scripts can. So we're simply making an INT script do this. So all we need to do, we simply need to copy the name of that, and then go into the player start, which I said we weren't going to be messing with the player start that much, but this is the one instance where we probably would want to do that. And we're going to make the player start fire to this, except we also need to add cut underscore at the front of it. Alright, so basically this is going to do all the hard working for us, and now all we need to do is simply get the model and place it down. So let's take this model right here. Also, I need to increase my grid size again. I definitely don't want to be on that grid size anymore. And place another thing over there. Now obviously you could just jump over there, but we're going to make it look all dramatic and make it be like, yeah, it's actually impossible to do that. And then let's just take this right here, because this actually will work just fine. Take this, and we will rotate it a little bit, and move it up a little bit over there. And then let's move it a lot closer to the wall, but not too close, because the weird thing about shimmy pipes is that if you are unable to shimmy on the back side of it, you are unable to shimmy on the front side of it. Makes sense, right? Which means we're actually going to need to move everything a little bit forward. So let's just like quickly move all this stuff forward. Now you might see an issue here is that this is overlapping with this, all right? So we're going to do a little bit of a quick grouping right here where we're going to make that disappear. And then we're going to take all that right there and move it forward 1. Take this and move it forward 1 as well, and then we're gonna make this reappear, and that should be barely enough room to shimmy on it. We need to change the tag of this and add shimmy 1 onto it. You can change this anywhere between the number 1 to 32. The DevKit supports up to adding 32 of these in a map, but if you know what you're doing with INT scripts, you can add an infinite amount of these. One more thing we need to do. You need to come into here. When you have something deal with an INT script, which right now we have the player start currently firing to an INT script, we have to have this actor in the map, which is called Cut Factory. It doesn't matter where this actor goes at all. It just simply needs to exist somewhere. I'll literally just leave it there in the middle. Okay, now there's one last thing that we need to do, and that is that we need to add nodes to tell the game that we are supposed to fall down when we hit a certain point of this pipe, alright? So we could find that in key point, and it is just called Shimmy node. So we need to place down 2 of these nodes right here, and we need to take these nodes and move them. We need to put one at that point, and another one at this point. And now we need to connect them through label next and label previous. So we're going to consider this the first node of the bunch. So we're going to call this Shimmy node 1, and this one Shimmy node 2. So the next node is the second, and the previous node is the first. We also need to set this to force the player to fall, because otherwise the entire game breaks. Alright, after spending an additional 5 minutes trying to figure out what my problem was here, I completely neglected the fact that not only does this have to be shimmyable from both sides, but it also needs to be tall enough. So all I did, I made this a little bit taller, and I also made these a little bit bigger with a radius of 30 rather than a radius of 10, but that's all I did. So if we come over here, we can, wow, that's a great ladder right there. And then if I jump up here, I get onto the pipe. If I keep on trying to go off the pipe, it's going to force me off. And if I try going the other way, it's going to force me off the other way. Something to note is that you need to make these nodes wide enough, because if you don't, you get situations like this where you can just kind of keep going, and you're not supposed to keep doing that. And sometimes when you hit surfaces, it's just really bad. In fact, I'll even show the proper way of doing it. Okay, so as for this actually works completely fine, because this covers both sides of it. But just to be a little bit safer, I'll do a value of 40, but this is not what you want to do in your map right here. And I did this on purpose, believe it or not. So you actually would want to move this all the way back here, and then make sure it covers both sides, and now it's good. But yeah, that's basically how you do shimmy pipes. As you can see, it's not necessarily easy or even convenient in the slightest to set up these shimmy pipes, but they can add a lot to your map if done properly. Alright, let's go ahead and add some cool looking water, including gravel water and real water. So let's do that right now. Let's add that over here. Let's make a little bit of a pool right here, and we're going to want to carve out a little bit of a pool here. So let's just do real water first, and real water refers to the water volume, where you can actually swim up and down in it at will. Let's just make this a little bit of a, let's make a 384 by 384 by 384 box right here, and we will carve it out. Alright, so let's subtract that, and I have bad texture, so now we're going to go back and fix it. Alright, and now we want to add a water volume, and that's basically all there is to it. Now, as you can see, there's no actual visual for it. The most you can really do is add something for the top of it, which is what we're going to do right now. We're going to add this super cool actor. This actor is found in Info, and it is called Fluid Surface Info, so just click that. Right click and place it down, and you're gonna be like, what in the world did we just place down? This is a really cool actor that's in the game. So select him, let's make sure that it's actually gonna snap. He is snapped, alright, good. So let's move it over on top of this and then lower it down so that it properly covers this. Now we need to give it a texture. This can be assigned through a skin, so we click add here, and now we want to give it a texture. Alright, so let's go over to, I believe Hunt has a water texture that we can use. It's not that bad. Yeah, it has this right here. So let's use that. Click use. Now we have some water, which is awesome. But I'll also show how to get the water from Swamp real quick here. So simply open up Shrek Swamp. You want to click on the texture browser, and then click on this, and then scroll until you see my level. Click on that, and you're gonna see some interesting stuff in here. The main thing you want to do is get this right here. So you can click on this by clicking right around where my cursor is right there, and you can click this. Once you click that, you want to go back to your map that you were just working on, and now you can simply apply the skin just by clicking use, and boom. Now you have the swamp water, which is all reflective and stuff. Okay, so let's configure this right here. You can see there's a lot of black lines here. We want to make these lines only cover the hole itself, because otherwise it's going to eat up a lot of performance. Go in here and adjust the size of it. So you can adjust the size from fluid X size and fluid Y size. So I'm going to guess somewhere around 24. Yeah, 24 is borderline perfect. Let's do 22 instead. Probably do 18. Yeah, alright. So as long as these are all covered, then everything's going to look completely fine. Now let's add a light. I'm just going to borrow this light over here, to be honest. I really don't want to have to try to recreate the cool blue light. But putting this down here should kind of give it a cool little atmosphere. Alright, so now that we have this we're going to make a second little pool here, and this one is only going to be 16 units down in the ground, so you're going to be able to like step in and out of it. It's gravel water, guys. It's your favorite. So we're going to make this a significantly smaller pool because this one's just simply not as exciting, but is a lot more widely used in the game. As you can see, this isn't properly aligned, so I'm just going to make this a little... Yeah, that's the grid we want. Right, so subtract that. As you can see, it just picked the texture, but we don't want the water texture. Alright, so here is the main thing with gravel water. Gravel water has to use the gravel texture. And not only that, but if in a full game mod you decide to modify the Shrek Swamp texture pack, it's going to break gravel water entirely. Essentially, this texture in particular has data that we cannot bring back, which is very annoying, but it works, I guess. You can also use prefabs to try to get gravel water back if you do want to modify textures like that to lose that. It's just kind of a really annoying process, so generally just no one does it, but if you want to, the option's there. So anyway, now we have gravel here, and this is going to actually work like water. Let's just take this right over here, and then just copy and paste it, move it up just a tiny bit. Alright, so we're going to want to optimize this a little bit. Let's just reduce the size of this by probably like 10 by 12, yeah. 10 by 12 is what we want. Awesome. Alright, well, let's test it and run it. Alright, so if we run back here... Well, first off, we're going to get ambushed because we've kind of already set that up, but let's just ignore them. So as you can see, the water is looking real freaking nice. It looks so good. Now this is because we're using fluid surface info. Now the thing is that you'll only see this on the high quality config, which if you're confused is what I mean by that, is that if you are running this game on the speedrunner config, which lots of people are, you will only see this as just flat, non-animated water, which I suppose is fine because that's what everyone's used to anyway. But if you have the correct config, then you'll have actual water. So if you walk in here, we're going to get slowed down, but you'll actually notice that there's no water splashes, so we're going to real quickly fix that. So you'll see where we have a volume here. If we right click here, and then we click on the water surface volume, we add a water surface volume, and then we save the map. Right now, if we walk over here, you'll notice that you actually get some water splashes. So yeah, unfortunately, the water splashes are not there by default, but also fortunately, it's very easy to add them back in with just a little bit of time and effort. And then as for this, well, if we go in it, then, you know, we start sinking and stuff, and it's really cool. Now, the problem is that if you jump, then that happens. You actually can die to fall damage like that, and you also kind of sink. It's not exactly the best water. And not only that, it's also kind of hard to get out of here. So it would be highly recommended that you use a mount volume like I showed previously. We got some really cool stuff right here. So yeah, now you know how water works. Alright, I'm going to do a quick little thing of optimization. Optimization is core for any map ever in this game. You really need to pay attention to optimizing. Alright, so let's first use zone portals to optimize our map. Now, what are zone portals? Well, you might already remember that I've talked about zones, and this is all one zone, but what if I said we could split up these zones so that they actually can occlude parts of the map when you're in certain parts of them? You can actually do that. What we need to do is we need to make a sheet, not a cube. This is the second tool that I'm going to introduce you guys to, is the sheet tool. I want to make this go on the x-axis, build it. We'll see that it builds vertically. I just want to bring it over here. We want to put it right there. We want this sheet to completely separate one part of the map from another in terms of BSP. So as you can see right now, it is completely blocking it. What we want to do, we want to click Add Special Brush. We want to click on Zone Portal, and then click OK, and it's going to place down that right there. We'll change the texture very soon, don't worry. And then we want to move this over here, and click OK again, and what we just did is place down 2 zone portals. Essentially what you want a zone portal to do is to split off rooms. So what's going to happen when we do a build? Well, nothing really. We're going to turn on the real-time preview so we can see through these, because that's the only way to see through them. And then we're also going to turn on zones, and you'll see that now there's a bunch of different colors. Now this is all pretty important. Now before we do any of that, let's just change the texture of this. I'll just change it to this placeholder texture. Alright, that's cool. Now we have this, let's load in the game. So, you'll notice that nothing really has changed. So let's just do R mode 1, and we can kind of see how everything is getting loaded right now. As you can see, nothing back there is getting loaded when it was, in comparison, getting loaded before. And as you can see, it kind of gradually all loads in. Now that all just unloaded over there. Now one issue with zone portals is that you can have instances like this, where now it thinks I should be seeing the room over there, when in fact that's not the case. So we're gonna fix that real quick. So what we need to do is we need to add in the zone info actor right? So just click on that, and we're gonna add this actor in. It's recommended that for every zone in your map that you have one of these actors in. So it's somewhat common for you to use it. What we're trying to do is to reduce the amount of actors and stuff that are all being rendered at once, but without actually appearing to do that. So let's just make this a little bit bigger because you're probably going to be using this a decent amount, and we also want it to snap. So it doesn't matter where you put these necessarily, just put them anywhere as long as all they have to do is simply be in the zone. Like this setup works because there's this zone here, and then this zone here, which I've declared with those portals I placed down. Now we want to go into the zone visibility tab, and we want to make it to where we exclude one of the zones, alright? So if we go over to the object tab, you'll see there's a name that's automatically assigned, and you can't change this no matter what. This is assigned to Zone Info 1, this is assigned to Zone Info 2, and this is assigned to Zone Info 0. So these get assigned based on how they are written into the map, like in the order. So we know for a fact that if you are in this massive room, there is no possible way that you can see this room, right? So we want to manually exclude it due to the fact that you can still sometimes render it even when you shouldn't be able to. So we want to go over here, and we want this to not render Zone Info 0. Alright, so we want to come in here, click Manual Excludes, and now we want to type in the exact name of the zone info that we want to exclude, which in this case is Zone Info 0. If you hit enter now, it's going to enter in a bunch of stuff for you. And now we just essentially said that if you are in this exact zone in this map, it can't render anything in this zone. And let's do vice versa for in here, Zone Info 1. And that makes it to where if you're in this zone, it can't render anything here. Let's load up in the map. Alright, so now if we R mode 1, no matter what we do, we cannot render that zone over there, right? And now if we come over here, as you can see, it's not rendering. Now, the only problem, I suppose, with these zone portals is that I actually put it here, so I could still render it like this. So the smartest way is most likely to put it here, which I'll do. Alright, so I just moved the zone portal from over here to over here, then gonna build the map, and that should make it a lot harder to accidentally render stuff. Alright, so let's check it. How well does it unrender? As you can see, it's virtually unrendering everything. You'll notice that sometimes it can just randomly render stuff back there, but it's generally stuff that just has a different sort of priority, and in this case, the mover. While we're in wireframe mode, I'll quickly explain what everything is trying to represent. So yellow is a mesh, blue is a static mesh, white can be terrain info or BSP. This kind of weird, like, pale, like pink is a volume, purple are movers. Oh yeah, then there's also black, which I don't know why they made one of the colors black, which is fluid surface info. But yeah, now you should know how to optimize your map with zone portals. But there is also another method, which is the anti-portal. An anti-portal is what everyone should be using in an outdoor map, right? So an anti-portal is best used when something is rendering when you know for a fact it shouldn't be rendered. And this is when zone portals can't work, and also if it's in an outdoor map. When it's in an outdoor map, there is no possible optimization except for anti-portals. But the problem with the anti-portals is that they take up a lot of performance per every single one you add. Now I'm going to do a super basic example that's not really going to be used necessarily in a practical sense, but rather in a way to show how it could be useful. So let's just simply make a sheet the same way that we did before, and I'm making a sheet because when you're dealing with anti-portals, you want to reduce the amount of faces that's on in the brush itself. So we don't want to make like a really thin cube or whatever, because I mean, this is going to be a sheet anyway, more than likely. And also, you don't want to make your camera go into this anti-portal, because if you do, then it's going to ruin everything. But yeah, let's put it right there. Then click this button right here. This is the anti-portal button. That's going to spawn in the anti-portal. Now we just save it and then load it, and you'll see that now it doesn't render the cube that's behind there. Essentially what the anti-portal is doing is that if an object is behind it and there is not a single part of the object you can see, it'll completely unrender it. But keep that in mind, it has to completely hide the object. If there's even a tiny bit of it showing, it will still render. And also, well, if you get into it, bad stuff's gonna happen because everything tries to get occluded, and that's not possible. So yeah, essentially, if you're in an outdoor map, use anti-portals behind like where there's like tons of trees and stuff, but there's like still like map behind it and stuff like that. Anti-portals are really great when it comes to a U-style map. In fact, I'll show an example right here. So this is Hunt 1, as you might be able to tell, and this style of a map is basically a big U. Fun fact, if you are in this viewport, you can actually press T, and it will show all the terrain in that viewport, which is really cool. So as you can see, it's quite literally a U. But you see how no wonder use these anti-portals. Now, while not in the most optimal way, because you definitely wouldn't want to have that many right there, having an anti-portal right here and right here would probably be the most optimal possible. And having that many anti-portals is really bad. Don't do that. Essentially, with how the developers set this up is that when you spawn in, you can't render any of this over here. But then when you start coming over to where the log is, which is right here, we're right here on the map, then it starts rendering all of this over here, but it can't render this. And also, there is also fog on the map, so it can't really render stuff that far anyway. But yeah, that is like essentially how you want to be using anti-portals. There is also a weird case where you can do stuff like this, where there's an anti-portal right here, which splits this house in half, so you don't render stuff that's behind the house. But this is not that helpful. It might be helpful, but you almost are just risking it, because every anti-portal you add hits performance pretty bad. This is what I like to call a risky anti-portal, where it just doesn't occlude too much and it has a rare use case. You can try to use these if you want, if performance happens to go up, but just every single time you add one, the performance is going to go down unless it's actually helping. So just be very careful with it. Alright, let's add in a boss real quick. We're going to add in a PIB boss, but I'll show how to add all the other bosses. Now obviously, recreating the bosses is very annoying, and there's a lot of properties that the developers have set, so these are all already in prefabs. But here's a problem, is that this map is actually just too small. So we're just gonna take these 3 lights in the brush, and we're just gonna make this fork off into another hallway. Alright, so I've just added another room into the map. As you can see, this is where the room is. I haven't done any optimization here, but I'll just leave it for right now because it's kind of fine the way it is, even though I would definitely add a zone portal here. We want to go into here and then simply go to the groups. Now you might remember a while back I was talking about textures and how there are groups assigned in textures, but they're not useful. In the prefab pack, there are groups and they are actually useful. You could just click all and have every single prefab load in, but you don't want that at all. So rather click on this and click on the map that you saw the thing from. So in this case, if we want to load in the PIB boss fight, it was done in Hunt, so load into Hunt, and you can see it's literally the first result is just this right here. Then we simply right click and add prefab. And is that going to fit? No, of course it's not. Why would it fit? Right, so this is actually a great time to show how to resize this room without breaking it, alright? So this is how you're going to resize it. Well, first off, we're going to move this over here a little bit. But you might think, okay, well, we'll just subtract again, right? No, that is completely incorrect if that's what you just thought. What you need to do is you want to take this brush right here, and you want to delete it, right? And then you want to recreate it from scratch. So we did a 1024 by 1024 by 1024 room, but we want to make this one 2048 by 2048, but still make it 1024 tall. So we will put it right here, and we'll render it just so we can see it, and then we subtract. Now hold on, before you think, wait, but the room is still here. It's actually not. If we were to click build all, this is what happens. The room does not exist. So if I click subtract now the room exists. Alright, so I just position that right there, and then we can do a build. That's probably not going to render. Yeah, it's not the best, but we'll leave it there. I think that kind of looks cool, having it all fade to freaking black over there, so we'll leave it. Alright, so is there anything significant about this that you should know? Yes. These targets right here and certain other things in the game rely on this right here, the label of it. Some things simply don't use the tags. Some things use tags and labels, and some things only use labels. Now, there's very few things that use labels, but these boss targets that PIB use are one of the very few things that require labels. Essentially, if you want to make your own boss fight, well, you can add as many of these points in as you want, but to note it, you have to simply set the starting target. So the starting target is wherever PIB is, and then you make the label next and previous be this, and then you just repeat that for as many as you want. And then you make the label what the tag would be, which, funny enough, you can actually remove the tag and it would still work. It only relies on label. But I've added the tag just to make it a lot easier to see. And also, with this prefab comes a new trigger, the boss encounter trigger. And if this trigger is connected to the boss character, which in this case is boss PIB, then a boss fight will commence. And you have all these other properties here. So how this is set up by default is whenever you hit this trigger, the boss fight will just commence immediately. Right, so it appears that we have a little bit of an error here. I didn't actually, I didn't see this. Freaking another one of these got broken. Awesome. And it appears to be being caused by this, so I'll try this and see if that works. Alright, that seemed to have worked. Just moving it over. Alright, so now if we go over here to where Boss PIB is... Wow, that looks freaking ominous. If I hit the trigger, the fight starts. And he's just gonna start jumping at me and doing whatever. As well as Donkey talking, because that is hard-coded into the game for him to start talking. And we can hit him, and we can also kill him, and whenever he dies, he fires an event, which you can connect to, you know, whatever you really want. But yeah, that is how you can do these bosses. And before I move on to the next topic, if you want to do any of the other boss fights, there's the one in Hamlet with the bandit boss. It's the same exact principle where you hit the thing, and he does the thing. Here's the Fat Knight one, which is right here. And before you ask what this is an actor that adds in a route for an AI to take a specified path to something. But for some reason, this Fat Knight doesn't work without it just being bound to one, even if the route does nothing. It's really weird. And then, of course, you have the FG Marina, just in case you want to, like, replicate it. But yeah, that's how you do boss fights. Alright, so by this point, you're kind of getting to the point where we're just starting to just get, like, right into just doing complicated stuff. Let's go ahead and do something more complicated. Let's use the 2D shape editor. Right, so the 2D shape editor is located up here. When you click on it, it pulls up this thing, alright? So what is this thing? Well, so essentially, we can make any shape we want, alright? We can click on whatever point we want. We can move it around with the cursor. And if we want to add more points, and also take note of the line that is thicker, if you hit Control-I, it will split the points between that, and then you can move this wherever. So let's just make like a cool little circle, I guess. We can do something like this, right? Alright, there we go. We got a cool little circle design. The origin of wherever this is based on this little green square right here. So I'm going to leave this in the center because that just makes the most sense. So I haven't really explained this. Why are we making a shape? Well, so this shape editor can be used to make a complicated brush, alright? You should already know what the brush is at this point. It's this thing right here. So if I click on something like this is an extrude shape, which essentially allows you to turn something that's 2D into 3D. Simply click on this and set the depth, which is how far it's going to go. We can make this like 64 or something like that. Click OK. And we just now created a very complex shape. And you could do a ton of stuff with this as well. I'll quickly put this on the map just so I don't forget it. I'll put it like in a wall or something like over here. Wow, look at that. We just made a complex thing. Now here's an even cooler thing. I wasn't going to do this in the first place, but I'll do it right now anyway, just because why not? We want to show off some cool stuff. Also, just a word of note, whenever you click X on this, you lose all your progress here. A really cool thing about the 2D shape editor is that you can actually save shapes and then you can load them back up later and use it in other maps. If you are the creative person, you should be making lots of shapes, lots of stuff, and then saving it like in a folder or something and then coming back to it whenever. It'll speed up your mapping process a lot if you want to get into really complex stuff. Anyway, you might have seen that there is this right here, the Bezier segment. If we click on this, it does this right here. Essentially, you can mess around with this however you want, but you can make some really crazy stuff with this. Like, it's just freaking insane. Something to note though, never do something like this. You can't overlap that with that, because that just breaks the engine entirely. But look at that. And then you could have it like extrude to a shape or a bevel if you want it to be even more complicated. And then you can get super complex shapes like that right there. Like look at that shape, dude. Like look at the shape. This is like such an overly complicated shape, it's not even funny. And look at that. I just took that shape and then I can add it back in and then break the entire engine. This is exactly why you should not go crazy with shapes. But yeah, the main point is that you can go crazy with shapes, but don't go that crazy, and be a little bit reasonable with it. But you could do some really cool stuff if you know what you're doing. Alrighty, it's time for the terrain creation. I'm not joking around. So, terrain is where this game goes from really cool to even more cool than you thought was cool. If you know what you're doing, at least. So, the thing is that you can't really just connect indoor maps and outdoor maps and have everything be correct. So, we need to make an entirely new map. But I'm not going to just split it into two because that's going to be annoying for the tutorial. So we're just going to make another big box and we're just going to put it like, let's just put it like over here. Put it over there and subtract. Alright, so this is going to be our outdoor map. Now what we need to do first we actually need to bring back the zone info because it's required here. And we're gonna make this zone info be terrain zone set to true. You have to have this set to true, otherwise nothing works. Right, now we want to click on the terrain editing window here. Oh my gosh. So this window, it can be an absolute pain. If you open up this window and everything is on the left here broken, or this entire menu is broken, then that is where the fix folder comes into play. If that happens, then you want to delete this entire directory. Of course, you probably don't want to delete Shrek 2, so move the Shrek 2 directory out before you do that. And then put the fix folder in its place, and then duplicate the fix folder. And then that fixes dumb problems like this. And if you still get a broken window, then just repeat all my instructions from the very start so you get everything working. It's just super annoying stuff. Alright, so we want to click on Add Terrain Info. Make the package my level, make the group nothing. Name the terrain something like Terrain 1 or something. And then set the size to something that sounds reasonable, I guess. Would be the best way I would put it. To be honest, I don't know too much about size, but I generally just set the size to 128 by 128, and it seems to be pretty good terrain when I do that. I'm pretty sure that Hamlet terrain is 256 by 256, while Hunt terrain is more like 128 by 128. It's something like that, I don't remember. Yeah, and then click OK, and you will get a terrain info somewhere in the map. I don't know exactly where it just put it in the map. Let's use the search function tool, which you can use up here. It's called search for actors. It's a binoculars icon. When you click on that, you can search up whatever you want. You can see I already searched for this once. But yeah, you can search up literally whatever you want. You can search up the boss encounter trigger. You can search up, well, the terrain info, which we really need to know. We can double click on this, or we can click on go to actor. We can also delete the actor. Alright, so it did appear to spawn in here. Set this to snapping. Let's move this to the center of the map, and move it up a little bit. Then let's click back on the terrain editing tool, and then we need to build. Alright, so as you can see, this little thing just appeared here out of nowhere. This is really good. This essentially says that, yeah, you got everything set up properly, and you're like not being dumb. So that's really good. Alright, so now we need to go to layers, and we need to make a new layer. So go over to your texture browser. We want to click on whatever we want to use as the base texture. Now, I would assume you probably want to use grass, so click on grass. And click new, and we just want to set this to my level, set group to none, set name to grass, and then set the alpha height and width to be 128 by 128. And then you more than likely want to set the UV scale to, I think, around 2 or so. This is essentially how much the texture is going to be scaled up to look correct. And click OK. So stuff should have just happened. Look at that. Now we're getting stuff. Okay, so this terrain is a lot bigger than I thought it would be. So we need to use a tool that I was going to suggest a little bit later, but we need to use the visibility tool to cull all of this off. So essentially you can adjust the size of this. I would adjust it like so, where you adjust the inner radius to make it bigger and the outer radius to make it smaller. But you can do stuff like this if you want to be a little bit more creative with it and try to get some cool results. I'm going to set the radius to something like probably around there. So we want to essentially cull this terrain. So go over to terrain, click on this, because if you don't click on this and highlight it, then it's not going to work the way you would think. Then click on the visibility tool, and then hold Control right click while you are hovering over all this to properly cull it. Make sure all of it gets culled. I'm going to be a little bit excessive with culling it, so everything works. Let go, and then let's like add some back to just essentially fit this little area. Let's just make a little bit of a circle here. That's fine. Now let's bring the light from here and just drag it over here so we can start seeing stuff. And as you can see, we can actually see the terrain already. So let's click build and see what it does. Alright, well, everything kind of looks a little bit odd, but we do have terrain in here. So we need to fill up this box with terrain, so I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick. Alright, so now we have properly culled away all of the terrain that we would ever need. The main thing we need is for this to just be bright. Alright, so we need to add some sunlight. So first off, let's make this a fake backdrop in order to bring the skybox in. And then let's go over to the light tab over here. Click on, not spotlight, sunlight. Add sunlight, and we want this to point down. So let's use the rotating tool to properly rotate it down, tilt it over a little bit, and then build. Alright, so there we go. Now we are getting some sunlight here. I kind of made it rotate a little bit too much. Just do something like that instead. Now let's build it again. Awesome. And if we hit K, then it's starting to look a little bit more normal. Except we have these really drab walls over here. Kind of need to... Yeah, let's just do this instead. Or let's just like toggle them all off. Alright, there we go. So now we have everything basically working. So now we have a pretty small room to work with, and it's properly culling everything over there, which is cool. At this point, you could just let your creativity run wild with really whatever you want to do. I'll quickly explain some of the tools, but a lot of it's going to be pretty intuitive. Alright, so if you want to make everything go up and down, use the paint tool, alright? So configure the radius to whatever. Definitely configure the strength, because strength to 100% is going to make it go up, like, just immediately. So configure, like, put it somewhere around to, like, well, in this case, probably like 10 to 20%. Alright, so if I hold control left click at all, it's going to start going up, and then control right click makes it go down. And you can already imagine what crazy terrain you can make with this. It is actually super intuitive to do this kind of stuff. Of course, when you're making outdoor maps, as I've already said before when I was talking about anti-portals, having like stuff that purposely blocks your vision like in front of you, like freaking like hallways and mountains and stuff like that, do it. You will get the best performance out of all that. Like, even, like, stuff like this, like, where it might even be, like, a crater, but just do it. The engine loves this stuff. So you do that, you can do some smoothing if you want to attempt to make some things just look better. When I do this, I generally do a single click in a general selection and just see how it works, and if it didn't work well. Something I should note is that the undo button just really doesn't work the way you would think. I would recommend saving all the time when working with terrain and then loading the map if you made a mistake, because making mistakes are incredibly easy to do. But yeah, let your imagination go freaking wild with this. All of it is super self-explanatory. One last thing I'll mention is how to add an additional texture, which in this case we'll just add grass leaves right here. You can see at the hitbox for clicking some of these is kind of weird, but it works. You can see we can add that, and then if we were to paint while we have this selected, if we click in here, we will add this. If you see it appearing in circles, then this means that the size of the texture here and the size of the terrain info are not the same. Essentially, if the terrain info size was set to like 256 at the start, and then we set the texture size to be 128 by 128, you would get circles. So keep the sizes the same. It is super important that you do that ahead of time. But yeah, as you can see, I can now add this. Now I'm going to make this look a lot better. In fact, I'll even add rock texture in, because, like, why not? And then, not to mention, you can also add models on top of all this. So if you want to get even more creative, then you guys can start doing stuff like this. Now, this little zone that I've defined is super small, and it's only meant to be a little bit of an example. So obviously, if I try to like add something like this, it's just not going to look correct. Also, you might have noticed that this is like broken. If you get something like this, where you get no textures with this, check the static mesh and see if it aligns with the package that you just opened. I opened the Hun SM or whatever, and it said I just opened Ambush SM, which obviously is incorrect. So if I just click use, it's gonna fix that. Yeah, again, as I was saying, not really the correct map size, so it's not really gonna look that great. Alright, now you might notice something. Why in the world does it look so dark and bad when I'm doing all this outdoor stuff? Well, you want to guess what the solution is. It's actually the zone info. The zone info is coming here to save the day. Now watch this right here. Come over here to zone light, go to ambient brightness, and then set this to something like 48 or 64. I'll set it to 64. Watch this. I do this. Build. Boom. Look at that. Now it is daytime. Look at that. So this basically fixes all of the shading issues you're going to have. But something to mention is that in all outdoor maps, you have to still put lights around as if it was an indoor map on like the paths that players will take. And that's the only way you can make the maps look correct. Let's load up the map. I haven't like opened the map in like quite a while. But yeah, if I ghost over here, which by the way, if you want to move like this, you can type ghost, and then you can type walk to toggle like that. Now you'll kind of notice that Shrek is actually too bright, and you might be wondering, why is that the case? But the funny thing is that we're using ambient glow on Shrek here to make him look good in an indoor map, but you can't do this for outdoor maps. You actually need to set this back to 0. So while he'll look awful here, when we move over here, now he looks correct. So this is mainly why indoor maps and outdoor maps don't really mesh. And also, if you think that the textures are too small or too big, you can configure everything to your liking. I should also mention imagine that a terrain info with a size of 128 by 128, you can get super detailed. But if we pull up R mode 1, you'll see that there's a lot of grids. So it's probably not necessarily the best for performance if you're doing a full outdoor map to do 128 by 128. But if you're wanting like a little short little thing or a test thing, it's a great size to do. But yeah, again, mess around with it before you ever try making a map, because otherwise you'll probably be severely disappointed in some way, shape, or form if you don't try messing with everything ahead of time. Alright, so if you've gotten to this point in the freaking tutorial, then congratulations. Everything's about to get a lot harder and a lot more exciting. We are going to be talking about cutscenes. Alright, so this is the directory for cutscenes. I'm going to simply explain why some things work, then we're going to make a cutscene, and then that's about as far as I'm going to go with it, because at that point you should probably know what you're doing. So let's go into a simple cutscene, like the intro to this map.
Now to find the marriage ball and save the woman I love.
Alright, so I'm going to explain why exactly everything works there, and yeah. Alright, so here is the cutscene file for the cutscene that I just showed you. Now, all this stuff right here, just completely ignore it. Alright, so the main thing that you need to know with cutscenes is that all of these cutscenes operate in threads, alright? So imagine a thread is like a person with a job, alright? And this person does things, and this person can only do things if other people say that the person can do the thing. And then if they do, then they can do the thing. Alright, now convert the people analogy to a sequence. And that's what all these sequences are, alright? And the pawn tag is like the identifier of the thing. Pawn tag main is essentially where all the main stuff happens that is not exclusive to a person. Pawn tag main should be used for when this is like the freaking director. This is the guy who says, alright, this guy can do this thing, this guy can do this thing, now you can do that thing, and so on and so forth. And then you have the actual actors like Camera, Steed, PIB, Shrek. These are like the freaking actors. These are the guys who are actually doing the things. So you can almost think of it as a movie. You can see that they say stuff like wait for Q. So like what's wait for Q Donkey 2? Essentially what that means is that Donkey starts his sequence and then he immediately is halted. He can't do anything until this occurs. Alright, so when does Donkey 2 get fired off? Well, Donkey 2 gets fired off, well, on line 15. Right, at the very beginning of this cutscene, it stops music. This is redundant, alright? And this is probably redundant as well, cueing the camera, but you can do that if you want. The cutscene halts for half a second, and then Shrek says a line, and then we wait for him to say that line, alright? After he says that line, it then cues a bunch of things, like cueing for the camera to do a different movement, and it also cues for Donkey to do something. Alright, so now that I've explained that, you should probably know what cues are and how they work. And you'll see that it's used all over the place. Essentially, you can make a cue, and you can name the cue whatever, and then you can tie that cue to any wait for cue. So, think of this as events and tags. This is the exact same thing, where a cue is an event, and a tag is a wait for cue. It's identical. Alright, now you should know that there are some simple commands you can fire in through main. You can tell someone to say something, and this right here is pulled from hpdialog.int, which can be found in the system folder. You can play music with play music, space, and then the exact name of the track, space, and then whether or not you want to loop or not, which I'm pretty sure everyone wants music to loop, almost in every case, so you probably said this is true. You can trigger stuff, so if you want something to send an event to something, then you could literally send one, like this, where you can have an INT script do that, which this is what this is called, by the way. This is an INT script. And then there are other stuff, like stuff exclusive to the camera. Like the camera has the action to fly to a point, or it could target fly to a point, which target fly to is essentially, I'll show it in game actually. Alright, so you see what I'm doing right now, right? Like I'm looking at this, right? Oh, speaking of cameras, we can actually do this pretty easily. Type free cam, it allows you to move your camera around. This is only possible when you enable the debug mode, like I showed you at the beginning of the tutorial. Let's imagine that there is a target on this right here, alright? Like there's a point there, and then there's a point where my camera is, alright? So if the camera was here, alright, like looking at like this, alright? You could call fly to, and fly to makes it to where the camera itself moves to an origin, and target fly to makes it to where the camera looks at a specific point on the screen. So with the combination of these, you can do a lot of stuff. So to make something fly to, you say fly to space and then the tag for the point, and so on and so forth. And you can also do time equals and then whatever time you need something to be. which does support decimals as well. Alright, so with all that being said, let's make our first cutscene. So you want to click on New and then Text Document. And we want to name this literally anything that we really want. Now, something I should mention, you remember the Cut Factory actor that we added beforehand? Yeah, you have to have that in the map if you plan on having a cutscene in it, if I haven't already mentioned that. So, let's name this to YT_test, alright? If you don't see the .txt here, come over here and drop this down and then click on View and click File Name Extensions right here so you see it. So yeah, change .txt to .int and then click that, and now open the cutscene. Alright, we have a completely empty cutscene file. Alright, so first off, let's make the sequence. Start off in brackets, and then type sequence_0, and then we need to specify a pawn tag before we can actually start. So let's make this main, and then we need to make a line. So this is line 0, alright? So, what do we want to do? We could do literally anything we want. Let's first make the cutscene wait a second, alright? So we'll call sleep 1. And this could be 0.5, this could be 0.1. Point whatever the heck, it doesn't really matter, but we're gonna make this sleep for 1 full second. All right, and while we're at it, let's make another sequence. Let's make sequence 1 with a pawn tag of Shrek, so it calls to Shrek. All right, so now we've just made a second thing. We have an actor now. This also calls a line 0 because lines are exclusive to whatever sequence they're in. Let's make Shrek wait for Q CS start, and then let's make line 1 Q CS start. Alright, so now what we've just done is we've made it to where the cutscene is going to do nothing for a full second, and then it's going to tell Shrek that he can do something. We're going to make Shrek run to, then we'll just do like 0.1, although you should probably make it a little bit more specific than that, but for a test map it doesn't matter. Yeah, we're going to make Shrek run to a point. Actually, while we're at it, let's move Shrek to sequence 2, and we need to make another sequence right here for the camera, because if we're making Shrek run somewhere, then you basically should always have a camera somewhere, because otherwise you're just seeing Shrek just do something on his own while you still have the camera on Shrek, which is weird. So we just called a camera, and let's make line 0 also wait for Q CS start, right? Actually, we need to specify where the camera goes. So let's do fly to C.1, and then let's duplicate this, and then say target fly to CS.2. So what this essentially is saying now, all we've added is that the moment that the cutscene starts, the camera's gonna fly immediately to somewhere and immediately look towards something, which is good. We want the camera to target fly to Shrek for a time of 2 seconds. So this means that the moment that Shrek starts running, the camera is going to start trying to look at Shrek, and it's going to pan to Shrek for 2 seconds until eventually it's just locked on Shrek. Alright, so for Shrek, once he runs to this point, the next line gets fired once this is done, because everything goes one by one. Everything starts from the top and then gradually goes down the sequence, relative to each sequence, obviously. So for Shrek, once he runs to a point, we want him to trigger, and then we'll just have him trigger test 1 or something, alright? And then we're also gonna have him say a line, so we're gonna cue Shrek says stuff, alright? And we're just gonna copy this because I don't really want to have to type all that out. And we're gonna make the main thing wait on this. I don't know why I did that, I'm bad. Okay, so now the main thread is gonna cue the cutscene to start, and then it's gonna wait before Shrek gets to a point in that cutscene. At this point, we want Shrek to say a line, which we don't know what line we really want him to say, but we're gonna go into the HP dialog file, and we're just gonna look for a line that has PC_SHK, because that stands for Shrek, and this stands for Donkey, this stands for Fiona, PIB stands for Puss in Boots. That's the basic thing. Right, so way down here, yeah, let's do this right here. We're just gonna copy this. Shrek is gonna say, a 4-leaf clover. Looks like green's my lucky color. And we're gonna put that right here, alright? And then we're gonna tell the main sequence to wait for him to stop saying that line. Once that happens, we're then gonna queue for the cutscene to end. So we're gonna queue cut end, alright? For this to actually matter, we need everything to not end, alright? Because in an optimal world, we want every sequence to be called, and then we want every sequence to end at the same time. Because sequences can also end independent of other sequences, and that's really bad, generally. So we want this to wait. Oh my gosh, I can't type anymore. Line 5, wait for Q, cut, end. And then we're going to copy and paste that, except we can't quite have line 5 for Shrek because he has a different sequence. Boom. Okay, so basically, this is all that we really want the cutscene to do. All the cutscene's going to do, it's going to wait for a second, it's going to have the camera fly, it's going to kind of look at Shrek for a little bit, and then it's going to stop looking at everything. Once Shrek reaches the point in the cutscene, he is then going to trigger an event, and then is also going to say a line, and then the cutscene's going to end. So this is just kind of like it's a pretty basic cutscene. As you can see, it doesn't take long at all to do it. As for learning it, you can kind of learn it from No Wonder Maps, but just know there's a lot of redundancy in their cutscenes, so it can be a little bit hard to learn from that. Anyway, now that we've formed that cutscene, we now need to actually make a spot in the map where that works. But we're gonna need a trigger to start the cutscene. So let's place down a cutscene trigger. I don't think we can place it from here, so we're gonna have to go and look for that. So we go over here, go to trigger, KW trigger, cutscene trigger, minimize that. Now we're gonna place down the cutscene trigger, and we're gonna set the radius of this to something like 64, just a little bit of a bigger radius, a little bit easier to hit. And then let's make this not hidden, of course, because we want to be able to see what we're looking at. We want this to snap so we can move this better. Let's put this near the tree. So to connect this, we want to copy this, then go to the event, and then paste it in with cut equals on it. Alright, so with this setup, whenever we hit this, it's going to fire to the INT script. Of course, it's only going to work out if it actually finishes well. Alright, so we need to actually add the cutscene points into the map. There is a really neat way of adding camera points, though. Click on this right here, and, well, you might think you can make a cutscene here, and that is technically true. It's just that Shrek 2 doesn't like this at all. This is like the scuffed version of the cutscenes that Shrek 2 supports, because they added their own system in. We don't want to use this. If you click on Tools, there's a really neat thing here where you can add an interpolation point and a look target, alright? Essentially, this allows you to very quickly place down camera points. Let's make it to where when the cutscene starts, it's going to put the camera right here, alright? When you click add interpolation point, it puts a camera there at that exact spot where you were viewing it through. And now we need a bunch of look targets, alright? And I probably need to clarify this. An interpolation point is what Fly2 uses to, and then look targets are what target Fly2 should be using. Now, I say should be because you don't technically have to do that, but if you want it to just work well, then yes, it's recommended that you do that. And not to mention, the best part about the interpolation point, actually I will just remove this entirely, because I completely forgot to mention that when it comes to interpolation points, you don't need to specify a target to fly to. You just simply fly to it, and it also flies with it. But if you don't want that, then you want to use an interpolation point alongside specifying a look target at the same time. We don't actually have anything that the camera needs to look to, so we don't need to add look targets, but otherwise we would do that. We need to add some KW look targets. These are just like the best thing to use when it comes to making something run to something. Now let's name this point 1, and we'll move this pretty far away from the cutscene point. And by pretty far, I mean a little bit far. Yeah, and I also need to rename this to C point 1. Oh, one more thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually have Shrek walk to a point. And in fact, I'll even go as far as this, because I don't want to leave this out of the tutorial. I'm going to add in the other exclusive pawn tag, which is on exit. And essentially what on exit is, it's a special type of sequence that can only do either something like Shrek trigger actor and then insert event here, or you can save game, and if you haven't saved game 1, then it just saves to whatever slot you're currently on. And then there's also this as well. You can also do this. You can call no bypass right there. What this essentially says is that this cutscene cannot be skipped no matter what you do. Alright, so now that we did that, let's just go ahead and run it. Oh yeah, I am completely dumb, I'm sorry. Okay, this is actually completely redundant. I'm actually super dumb. Yeah, don't add that. Oh yeah, actually, let's do one more thing. I'm going to add an animation that will play for Shrek. So let's go to the animation browser, which is represented by the letter A. Then go to Shrek characters, and then try to find Shrek through all of this. It's kind of a mess. This actually works just fine here. But you can play any animation you really want here. You simply click on the animation, you click the play button, and it does the thing. I'll just make him play unhappy reaction because I think that's fine. Okay, so something like that would work just fine. And you could also specify the rate. You can specify the tween, which essentially the tween is like how crazy is the transition between him not doing anything and then him starting the animation. And you could also have it loop if you do loop true, stuff like that. All right, let's see what it does. All right, it waits for a second. Is he gonna walk?
A 4-leaf clover.
Boom, he does the animation.
Like green's my lucky color.
Cutscene ends with a save, and there you go. That is the cutscene right there. And also, because this is through a cutscene trigger, you can't activate it multiple times. Not that that's not really exclusive to the cutscene trigger. You should just use cutscene triggers all the time for cutscenes if you can. You can still fire them through triggers if you have to. There's a few reasons to do that, and you'll probably figure that out as you're messing with it, but I'll leave that up to you. Alright, so what if we wanted to make this an intro cutscene instead of a cutscene that we just hit? It's actually not even that hard. So we're just gonna adjust the cutscene just a little bit, and we're gonna add a second point, and we're also gonna move this cutscene away. Although that's probably not I should just literally delete it or toggle the, actually yeah, I'll toggle the collision for you guys so you guys know what to do. If you want to toggle collision, set this to 0, set that to 0, then toggle these two right here. These are the two main ones. Don't toggle this off. I didn't even talk about this. I'll talk about this right now actually. Be collide actors. Always have it set to true if it's on a model or even a trigger. Because if you try deleting it when it's on false, or you try building when it's on false, you'll generally just get an engine crash for no reason. But if it's something like a light, it should be fine. Alright, so we need to adjust the cutscene a little bit as I was just saying, and we need to make it to where Shrek is going to teleport to point 2, and then we also need to update all these because I updated this way later than I should have. Go back and make sure that's properly named. It's not properly named because I forgot to do it, so we're going to do that. And there we go. So now we can actually just play this as an intro cutscene. Now, of course, to make it an intro cutscene, we need to go back to the start of the map, which is right here. Go to the player start, and then we just need to... Now, you wouldn't normally replace that right there in this case, but we are, and I'll show how to bring that back. Alright, so now if I RL the map, although it's going to be a little bit scuffed because I didn't tell it to move the cutscene camera for a while, but as you can see, it does literally the same thing. And it plays at the very start, and there's nothing you can do about it either. It will just play no matter what you do. And if we try hitting this, nothing's going to happen, even though it should fire. That's because we toggled off the collision for it. Oh, one thing I didn't mention is that you can hit space as much as you want. You are not skipping the cutscene at all. Alright, so how do we add in that DevKit thing that we just removed? Okay, so here is the basic way of doing this. What you want to do is you want to add a KW trigger into the map. Just add it literally anywhere. Toggle the collision off for it because we don't want to like accidentally hit it like in the middle of gameplay. It doesn't matter where it is in the entire map. I'll just put it right beside this since this is basically useless. And you can name this cut equals DevKit Shimmy pipe fix. Then take the name of this and set that as the tag. Alright, so for some reason at this point of the recording, I started messing around a lot and I can't really show any of the footage, but in short what I was going to say was make line 0, have trigger, space, and then the name and the tag of that one trigger, and then that would bring functionality back to the shimmy pipe. But yeah, that's basically all there really is to cutscenes. You can look at all the other cutscene files to see what other functions there are, but that's the basic premise behind them. As well as that, make sure you check on the DevKit and the functions that you can fire in order to get stuff like occluding fog in, and those shimmy pipes I showed you, and conveyors that move potions, stuff like that. It's just some really weird stuff that you can't do without INT scripts. But yeah, make sure you check the README. And also one more thing before I continue this segment is that you can also create teleporters very easily with that, because you could just call whoever you're playing as, teleport to this point, and then boom. And then also have them look at something. So you could just, under the player, you could do like turn to or face and then a point. Alright, let's real quick get into how to add in a movie trigger. So movie triggers are relatively painless. It's kind of hard for me to say that because I've had a lot of issue with movie triggers before, so I honestly wouldn't be surprised if anyone ever tries doing this and is like, wow, this is actually impossible. But essentially, it's possible to play any video ever made through Shrek 2, which is really cool. Essentially, you get this, the resolution-based movie trigger, place it down, has a cool little icon like that, and then you have this. You set the movie name, and oh my goodness, where do I even start with this? Essentially, you need to have Bing on your computer. And if you know what you're doing, I'm not going to go into the technical details of how in the world you can process an MP4 to whatever .bic that doesn't look bad, because it's a freaking pain to do it if you don't know what you're doing. But in short, you encode 3 .bic files and then make movie name that just has no movie. Just like copy the 1024 and put that for this. But like, okay, let's just say that you name your movie name. So it'd be movie name and then 1024 because that's the number and then .bic. And then you do that for all these, and then when you fire an event to it, it'll play the movie. Alright, so let's try to get into box triggers real quick. I don't really want to explain box triggers too much because I feel like it's just really monotonous to talk about, and there's not much to it. It's incredibly helpful in very specific scenarios. But essentially, what we want to do, we want to add a trigger first off. Of course, a KW trigger, because you shouldn't add anything else. And then based off of this, we want to move the brush to this point right here. So just simply take the numbers, copy and paste the location into that. And then you want to go to your brush, select your brush, and then paste the numbers that you just got from that trigger into here. Okay, so now the brush is on top of the trigger. Now we have to set the dimensions for the trigger. Now here's the thing, it's a trigger, alright? So, and I don't really want to go into the complicated details of this, but essentially, whatever numbers that you enter into this box trigger have to be multiplied by 2 to properly represent the correct size for it. So if we want something like let's do this. And also, just to make it a box trigger, just to clarify, set this as CT box, and this enables this third thing. Let's set the height to 50, set the breadth to 700, and let's set this one to 10, alright? So this is how you would translate it over. 50 times 2 over here, and then the breadth is actually the radius over here, so that's 700 times 2, and then 10 times 2. So we just made a box cutscene right there. Now simply right click on here, click volume, and this is just going to give you a nice point of reference as to where the collision for this is. And let's just have this fire to this cutscene, and let's remove the starting cutscene so we can just quickly test this. Alright, so our box trigger is right here. Let's just do this so we can see it. Wherever we hit this, it will activate, and it's about as simple as that, really. In fact, I'm pretty sure we can even go under this. Yeah, we can literally go under this. Yeah, that's how you make box triggers. You can rotate it, do whatever you want with it. It's really cool. Alright, I'm going to quickly explain how companion triggers work. Now, since we're not going over to the outdoor area anymore, I'm just going to quickly give myself more ambient glow on Shrek so he doesn't look quite as bad while he's in here. So what is a companion trigger, you might ask? Well, I'm going to go and select that in here. What a companion trigger is, its only core purpose is to make it easy to switch between characters and to command characters to do certain things. So I'm going to place down the companion trigger right here, and inside of the properties you got a bunch of stuff. A bunch of these just literally don't do anything at all. The only thing you need to worry about is the companion name and the trigger type and the time to switch. Everything else basically doesn't really matter. So first off, we want to specify what exactly this trigger is going to do. So a lot of these unfortunately don't work. The ones that do work, you have follow me, stop following me, wait for me, switch player control to, wait in corral, and cheer in corral. Although I don't believe that cheer in corral quite works. So follow me makes the companion name follow you. Stop following me does the opposite. Wait for me is literally just stop following me except without following, and it's basically pointless. Then you have switch player control to, which is a very quick way of switching control to a different character, which we're going to do right now actually. We're going to make it to where when we hit this trigger, it's going to make us switch to donkey. And then there is wait in corral. Wait in corral is if you want an AI to walk to a certain point and then just stand there and kind of move around sometimes. You can see the wait and corral thing over here in Hunt 4 with the companion corral right here, and Donkey can just kind of move around this, and this is the trigger that activates it. Whenever Shrek walks over here, Donkey will walk over here, and he'll just randomly kind of walk around here. So that's essentially all there is to companion triggers. Alright, so whenever I hit the trigger right there, it switches the control, and that's about it. There's nothing really else to talk about with it. Companion triggers are definitely a necessity when mapping, so you should definitely mess around with them to make sure that you know what you're doing. Alright, I'm going to talk about a really neat feature that the developers never actually used, and it's called the TelePit. Essentially what it is it is a trigger that upon the player hitting the trigger will cause them to teleport to a spot, alright? You can find the telepit through KW trigger. I'm just going to put a telepit right here. Then I'm going to make the radius like, I don't know, a little bit bigger. It doesn't really matter. Essentially, if we walk through, we're just going to hit it no matter what. Alright, so in the telepit, there is a property drop down right here. And you got a bunch of options here. This one doesn't really matter, but all these other ones are pretty important. You have B is active, and if you're confused as to what that means, there is also the telepit switch, which all this does, if you have this fire an event to this, it'll either turn on or off based on what this is set to. But yeah, is it active from the start or is it not? Does it instantly move the player? Do you want to use a tag for the destination or not? This essentially means, do you want to use a label for where to teleport the player to, or do you not? And by default, it defaults to the label and rather than the tag, which I would probably use a tag. Damage to do to heroes. Set this to 0 because more than likely, if you cause the player to fall in any way when they get teleported back and take damage, they can get soft locked with 0 HP. Then you have the teleport destination, so just simply pick a point somewhere. I'll just pick C.1, which will teleport us to the outdoor area. And this is the fade in and fade out speeds, and that's about it. Alright, so now if we come over here, run over here, and hit this, it's going to warp us all the way over here. And that's just a really cool way of warping the character around. You can also use that for a teleport instead of using INT scripts, because INT scripts can be a little bit more annoying, and that one's built into the map, so it's definitely better to do that for sure. Plus, it just works better. Alright, let's quickly talk about talkers. The game doesn't refer to it as a talker, but I would borderline refer to it as a talker. So in Pawn, KW Pawn Native, KW Pawn, and in Bumpline Speaker, you have a bunch of these right here. And essentially what these cause the player to do is to talk about something, but only if the character is inside of it and only if they're inside of it for X amount of time. In the prefabs, if you go to triggers in the prefab pack, you'll find the custom Bumpline speaker, and we're going to use that in this case. We're going to put it over here in this corner because we're starting to run out of room. So, you have two things here. You have the bump lines and the Bumpline speaker. This is the thing that matters right here. Alright, so there's already one in here by default, and you might be wondering where this is getting pulled from. So, if you come over here and open up Bump Set, you get all these bump sets right here, and this is what it's all pulling from. Essentially, it takes one of these, it takes the name of this, and then it takes all these, which you can probably see how this is like, you can easily do this if you want. It's not hard to do this at all. You essentially just take the voice line from HP Dialogue, put it as a line, and you can add whatever you want, by the way. You can just go to the very bottom of the list, you can just make your own custom one, you make a own bump line set, and then you just simply come in here, and you just add as many as you want. You can add multiple if you want, but generally you only add one of these. And then you just save and do it. And this is what happens when you walk over to it.
Sorry, no money, no magic. Oh, shove off if you haven't got the money. You're wasting my time.
So essentially what it does is it just plays every line possible until it runs out of lines. It will not repeat itself. And when it has to repeat itself, it'll stop just saying stuff altogether. That's the general premise behind it. So yeah, if you're having trouble making your characters speak, use that. It'll make your maps feel a lot more alive, for sure. Alright, but what if you want to make your maps feel more alive, but without these right here? Maybe you just want your character to say a very specific thing. Well, you are in luck. There is a trigger called the Popup trigger, and all this trigger does is make you just say a thing. So, simply place down the trigger, then go to Popup. This is actually a trick right here. There's just nothing here. This doesn't actually matter. Simply enter in the dialogue, and then how long you want it to be there. Alright, so I will take this voice line right here, and I'll leave the pop-up duration at 0, because if you leave it at 0, then it'll just play as long as the voice line plays for. What is really cool about this, though, is that you can also make this just simply display text at the bottom. So I'll actually do that right now. So I'll just copy and paste this, I'll just put this over here. I'll do this, I'll do PCYT Bumpline 1. Now we could take this, copy that, you can actually come over here, then go into HP dialog, then just scroll down to the bottom, and then just paste whatever you just put in there. Do bracket, and then that, and then calm, not clam. And then this is the one. Yeah, that's what I want to say. This is the one. And then we'll have the display for like 5 seconds. And then this I would just turn off, because otherwise you'll get an error in the console. But then again, no one's going to be looking in the console, so who really cares? And also, you never know. Yeah, let's just save it and run it. Alright, so this is what happens when I hit him.
You need to get some more money, pal. I think there's a job opening here if you're interested in an application.
Alright, and that is how that works. If you use these very well, you could actually make a map really freaking well with it. Although I suppose the only problem is that with the custom voice lines right here, it does require that literally replace a file, which is not going to be compatible with replacing other files, so kind of a bit iffy. Alright, let's get into the last thing before I am done with this, and we'll get into like the last few little tidbits being custom stuff. So, elevator movers. Elevator freaking movers, dude. It's just something else. Alright, so elevator movers are actually a little bit annoying to set up, so I'm just going to use this one right here, this bridge right here. This bridge is an elevator mover, alright? So essentially, what an elevator mover is, I mean, I would consider it to be the single best mover in the entire game. So these movers can be triggered by an elevator trigger, and you could just fire to these whenever. Essentially, in this, it'll say, go to keyframe what? And you might remember when I was talking about keyframes with movers. Essentially, with an elevator mover, you can tell a mover to go to a specific keyframe out of all those keyframes. So you might be able to imagine how much power you can really have with that if you know what you're doing. Alrighty, custom textures. How do you do them? Okay, well, custom textures are actually really easy. All you need to do to import a custom texture is to export it as a .tga with 32-bit color. And then whenever you do that, you can actually come up here to the browser, and you could do File, Import, and then you would just double-click on the texture. I don't obviously have one here, but you would double-click on it, and then you could just simply import it. And of course, if you're importing new textures, and obviously you need to make the package like whatever package you want, so it makes a new texture pack. But make sure you compress it to DXT5 in almost every case. DXT5 helps on the file size tremendously, and also it basically never really like makes the quality of the texture awful. And then of course if you have something that's like transparent or whatever, just have TGA transparency with like the black and white. And if you want to make it transparent, then just toggle these two, and then you're probably good. I'm not going to go into how to format .tga and stuff like that, but you have complete power if you know how .tga work. As for custom sounds, it's literally the same thing. Import into here as a .wave, and it'll go right in. And then there's custom music. Essentially, just export the music track as a .ogg, and preferably you want to have it around 25% quality, because more than likely it just won't hurt quality. And then there's custom models, which is basically the last thing I want to talk about. So, similar to how we've been using brushes, you can actually convert a group of brushes into a model itself. In this case, let's just use the 2D shape editor and just make a complex shape, like something that you wouldn't normally be able to make, and then just have it be that, and then we'll just do this, and we'll do that. Alright, so as you can see, I have a complex shape here. First off, you need to add it into the level, and then once you add it, you need to right-click on the brush, which you can only do through this view right here. You want to click on this, right-click on it, click Convert to Static Mesh. It's going to bring up this dialog here. Alright, so the package is whatever package you want. If you want it to be exclusive to the map, then type in my level, and my level is just generally the most convenient, but it's not the best in terms of file size. It's more preferred that you set the package to something else that's not my level, because my level just packs directly to the map file itself. If you do anything other than this, it should pack into the static mesh folder, and you can just add whatever you want to that. and we'll just call this test model. Click OK, and now some stuff just happened. So let's just delete this because that's a really bad thing of BSP art there. And let's go and add the model. Just come over here to my level, and we actually have test model. Right, so I could just right click, place it down, and then boom, now I have this static mesh right here. Now I believe the reason for this all being wonky is because this probably needs to be two-sided, and it's probably really broken just because of how I made it. But yeah, with this logic, you should be able to do just about anything with it. Here's an actor you might be interested in. Do you know that this game actually has an actor that allows you to just straight up just spawn things in runtime? Called the SH generic spawner. We're gonna grab it right there. Let's just like put it right over here in this corner right here. Spawn it in. Of course we want to make everything snap because why not? It just makes everything work pretty well. As you can see, this thing has an arrow, and this essentially tells the game where, like, what direction to throw the object in when it spawns. A lot of these options that are here are very self-explanatory. The main thing is how much of everything do you want to spawn, so you probably just want like one thing to spawn, and then this is like what you want to spawn, and then how much of that specific thing do you want to spawn, and then you can configure it all you want. You can mess around with this for literally hours, as I've already have before, but I'm gonna make this simply spawn a coin stack. I'm completely fine with that. I'll make it spawn 2 coin stacks, and we will bind it to an event called test3, and we'll save it and run it. Alright, so if we come over here, you can see how the spawner is visible. I didn't mention this, but you do have to manually toggle off the visibility for it every time, which means that every single time you come over here, you're going to want to come in here and toggle this to true. We can't make this a default setting, because if we did that, it would still show in game no matter what you did, and it would essentially just break everything. So you have to manually set that every time. But yeah, as you can see, the spawner's here, and you'll notice I actually didn't set up a trigger for this like I have every time. But the cool thing about this game is that there's actually a console command called cause event, and this works as essentially just like with INT scripts, how you can just do trigger and then whatever you want. You can do it like this, where you can just fire it and then boom. And as you can see, it did exactly what I did. I didn't configure the delay or anything like that, so that's why I didn't immediately spawn, but you can configure it however you want. Awesome. Now here is an extremely helpful tool that you should learn almost immediately upon doing any sort of maps, which I suppose I should have brought this up at the very beginning of mapping, but you'll probably only find this helpful if you're really into mapping at this point. So, you'll notice that every single time you have to start the map, like you come in here, you start the map, and then you gotta like go through walls, go wherever you want in your map. What if we could just like remove that process entirely? Well, you can actually do that with something called a nav shortcut. I've cleverly added it right here, just because you'll be using this a lot. So essentially you come in here, there is a bookmark drop down right here, and you simply set the description to whatever you want. I'll set this to water room, and you could just place these down wherever you want. I could put this one down right here, and then call this one PIB boss fight arena, and then I can go out here and mark this one out here, and then be like, okay, this is the outdoor map. And then we could also have a spawn room. Right, so now that we've done that, let's run it. So we are here, and you'll see that nothing actually appeared to change. But do you remember this debug menu we were talking about, and how I was talking about bookmarks and how this could potentially be helpful at one point? This is where it's helpful. All those that we just laid out there, you can now warp to, including the player start, which I know I said that the player start position is useless, but you also can warp to it if you want. You simply double click to it, and it'll just warp you, and you can click on this as well. You can click on any of these if you want. It's really cool. So yeah, if you want to be able to super easily warp around your maps and whatnot, just set up all your little like warp points, give them decent descriptions so you know what they do, and boom, you just warp around the map and do whatever you want. Jeez, the freaking, I love audio. Alright, there's one more thing I want to talk about, which is the round robin, and it's a super helpful tool. I'm just gonna grab it through here because, to be honest, I have zero clue where it is relative to the game. Do that. I didn't even add a quote there. I'm dumb. Okay, well, I guess it's fine. I guess you don't have to add quotes. Who cares? Anyway, you might be asking, what does this round robin do? Well, first off, I'll just place it down, and you're probably already confused why it's literally a round robin. Alright, so essentially what a round robin does, you can see from this drop down, it has, well, basically the only two things that are helpful are the out events and B loop. Essentially, we could have a trigger fire an event to this, alright? And then it would fire this event, and then you could have it fire this, then this, or whatever. And then if there's like nothing here, if you have B loop, it'll go back here, and then repeat all that. and if you don't have it on loop, it'll just stop. Which means you could have a trigger 3 different things each time it's hit, and stop doing that. Or you could have it loop through that, which, as you might know, this would be pretty helpful with the combination of the elevator mover, which I already taught you about. If you want to see a case in which the developers actually use round robins, well, here it is. There's 3 round robins, and there are, what is it, like 12 elevator triggers? You might be confused as to what these all do. Well, essentially, these control these movers right here. These are all elevator movers right here. And this is how they were able to get these to rotate like that. They just have this over here, and they have the button trigger this, which, as you can see, it's scripted to do this, which can then do this, then this, and this, and then it goes back to here. So yeah, that's how the round robin basically works. Here's something I completely forgot to talk about, but I'll talk about it right now, even though I probably should have brought this up at the very beginning of the tutorial, but this tutorial is kind of all over the place, so I apologize for that. Anyway, the dispatcher. The dispatcher is essentially a slightly better version of what KW triggers can do with these multi-events. Now, I didn't really talk much about this, but essentially you can have a trigger fire multiple events, as you can see. You can have it fire all those if you want, but the dispatcher is essentially a more crazy version of that. And by crazy, I mean can set the delay for each of these getting fired, and you can set up to 32 of these. You can make it absolutely crazy map event with a dispatcher if you know what you're doing. I'll quickly touch on a few of these right in here, just because I didn't talk much about them. There's the change level trigger in here, which you use to change between levels, and when you come in here, you simply set the new map name to, I don't know, like what if we want to go to Shrek Swamp, we would do shrekswamp.unr, because that's the map extension. And then there's also game states, which are super cool. Essentially, if an actor has this drop down right here, you could set an exclude for a game state and have it to where it can essentially unload certain things if it is on the exclude list. By default, when you load to a map, you are set as a game state 0, which I should probably preface what in the world a game state is. A game state is essentially the state that you loaded the map in, alright? So if you load it in a different state, that means that you could be in the exact same map, but different stuff can be there. Like, we can make this to where this will reload this map, but it reloads under G state 1 right there, or I guess G state 10. I could have set this to 1 here, but I'll do it like this instead. And then we could have it to where this peasant is excluded from G state 010. Now if we RL the map and come over here, you'll see that the peasant is still there, but if I reload the map and I was about to say, if I reload the map, now you'll see that the peasant is not there, and that's because of the G state that we are now in. Although something very important to mention is that I can't necessarily do it on a peasant. The peasant is actually still there. You can hear him. Yeah, you can see I'm still getting hit by the peasant. So, to clarify, a G state is super helpful, but all that the G state can do when you exclude them, it only turns off their visibility and turns off their collision. But this still means that they are in the world and they can still interact. So stuff like enemies are probably not practical. And this also means that you cannot just completely turn off triggers either, because you can still fire to a trigger even when it doesn't have collision. This does mean you could have stuff like, if you walk into an area, one cutscene can fire in this map, and a different cutscene can fire in this map. You can have cool stuff like that. You could also have it to where it turns off the visibility for like movers and stuff, because movers are dynamic and you can't just turn off the visibility for a static mesh. Yeah, it's something to consider for sure. You have the credits trigger here, where I'm not even going to show it, but if you touch it, it just simply plays the credits and then brings you back to the main menu. There's the damage player trigger, which is very useless, never use this. There's the hide trigger, where wherever you send an event to through this trigger, it'll turn off the visibility and somewhat turn off the collision for it, which could technically be helpful for map optimization, but it's not necessarily the best thing to do, and you really shouldn't use it, but it's there for people who really just haven't learned too much how to map and are just getting into it. There's the KW ground friction trigger, where you can actually change the ground friction in the map, and all you do is you simply go to here, you set the friction to whatever. The default friction of the game is 8, so anything lower than 8 is going to be more slippery, and anything higher than 8 is going to be less slippery. There's the leave bonus level trigger, which you will never use more than likely, which I should really touch on this before this tutorial ends, is that in the DevKit, if you're thinking about using this DevKit, read everything in the README and everything else. But bonus levels are really weird in the fact that we still cannot modify them perfectly. Essentially, while we can modify it, it'll always play as Shrek, which is not what we want. I believe in the current DevKit build with the 3 rebuilt Beanstalk levels that it will break if you just load into it, but you can modify it. And the way that you have it not break is if you just turn off the cutscene entirely, and or make a cutscene force someone as the character. But you can't just have it to where the characters can dynamically change currently. That's just not a thing. But maybe in a later version it will be, but I doubt it. Yeah. Lead bonus level trigger you'll basically never use. It's the trigger that is used at the end of every bonus level when you hit the very top of it. There's the message trigger, which you will literally never use. The official maps do use message triggers, but they are hard-coded to do very specific things by the developers, and you have no creative freedom as to what these do for you. There is the stay small trigger, which you can use to toggle whether or not a player should or shouldn't be staying very tiny when they drink like the shrink potion. And then there's also this trigger, which I didn't really talk much about. This trigger is somewhat helpful, but essentially, despite everything it shows in here, the only thing that it can actually do is play a sound for when you touch it, which can be super helpful, but generally it's not. And why it can be somewhat helpful is that it actually plays a sound directly where it was placed. So if you want some localized sound at a very specific static point in the map, then use this trigger right here. If you want those bugs that fly around in Shrek Swamp, then use, I believe, it's the Swamp Ambient Creatures. You simply just place it down, and when you come into here, you can see there's already a bunch of like things set up here. You can mess around with these as you want. Essentially, these just spawn bugs, though, in your map. There's this actor right here, which is the coin bonus game, which if you need a timer to run in your map, then this is a great way of doing that. You can make custom bonus levels with this if you know what you're doing. You can have a cutscene, aka an INT script running in the background that has its own timer that will force you to exit the level before the timer ends, because if the timer ends, then just generally everything breaks. There's the game flow markers, which if you're needing to place a letter down in a map for your own reference, then this is a really great way of doing that. You also put down numbers. There's the potion timer, which shouldn't even be here, but you can activate your potion timer if you put this in your map. There's save fairies, which you can access from right here, but the best way really to do it is just to simply use the save point fairy instead, because you get more properties when you modify this one instead of this one, which is much more commonly used in the game for some reason. There is also the work marker, which if you place this down, it's a fork of an AI node, and you could have it to where, as you can already see, it literally says it in it, but you can have elves play certain animations. But while I haven't tested this, I'm pretty sure you can also use this on any other AI in the game to make them play certain animations. You simply would just open up this right here, find the animation you want, like the name for it on the mesh, put the name in here, adjust the things as you want, and then you can have an AI do that. Which, just to be clear, you have to bind this to a route, which I guess I'll talk about a route right now, even though it's a really weird transition to talking about routes. So essentially what a route is it's an actor you can place down. Here's a route right here in Hunt 2. If we click on it, you'll see that there is a thing right here. It says the name of the route, and then there's waypoints for it. And these are all of these path nodes that are right here. In fact, if we go for the tag name for this, you can see that's like 1 gate 2. And in this route, it actually calls for 1 gate 2 right there. And this is connected through the routing tab, which is right here. If you give an AI a route name, then they will just run the route. As you might imagine, this is a super powerful tool to make your maps feel a lot more alive with having things just walk around on their own, but unfortunately is a little bit restricted due to the fact that you can only have 8 points. One thing that is nice though is that the AI would generally try to do a perfect circle, so if this node down here was perfectly connected with this one, then the peasant would just run around in a circle, but because it's purposely disconnected, he'll run down here and then he'll run back up and he'll do U's and stuff like that. So yeah, very powerful tool, and I don't hardly see anyone even talking about it. I'm not really too sure why. I know I was talking about cutscenes a little bit later ago, but while I did use like look targets and stuff like that for setting up the cutscenes, a much better way of doing this is using specific actors for specific points. Like you use cut key point mark if you want an actor to walk to somewhere, and you could use KW look target if it's something that something looks at, you know, stuff like that. But just to be clear, this is not required in the slightest, and it's just really, it just makes it more helpful for the mapper. So if you're working on a really major project, highly recommend you do this so that whenever you come back to your map, you can just remember your map real quick. There is the KW light, which I never talked about, but you essentially use this if you want to add a dynamic light into your map. But the problem with this is that about everyone uses a speedrunner config, and if they are running on that, they cannot see these lights. And not to mention, dynamic lights will absolutely tank performance. And if you want a quick example as to how much it'll tank your performance, just simply go to 5FGM Donkey and then fly out of the map. And if we type stat FPS, then you're gonna see, wow, look at that FPS right there. Jeez, what a freaking map. Of course, there's also the spotlight, which is just it's literally just a light that you can place down, but you can direct it towards something if you want, which is really cool. It's commonly used in the No Wonder maps for pointing towards levers. And there's also a whole entire slew of other objects that you'll find through the pawn tab if you just go to SH prop static, or if you go into SH pawn, you'll find a bunch of other stuff like in SH props. Like, look at all this. Very last thing I'll point on is why you should be using the prefabs occasionally, and some of the advantages you have over them, such as this right here. This is the better static mesh actor, and essentially what this static mesh allows you to do, it just simply gives you many more properties that you normally don't have on static meshes. You do have this right here, because this is a fork of a vine, but that has been completely deactivated. The only reason you'd ever want to use it is if you need box collision on a static mesh, because otherwise you can't do that. There's also stuff like the bounce plane, which whenever you right click and place it down, you'll see that it's just a really weird looking white plane. If you were to touch the top of this, it would make you bounce backwards as if you're hitting the top of a vent or a briar patch. If you're looking to quickly spruce up your map with a lot of crates, highly recommend that you use a bunch of these, because this is just a super quick way of just placing down tons of crates in your map if you're obsessed with that, without having to spend hours just organizing them all. There's even stuff like this with like the coin stacks, which are ironically not actually coin stacks, except for this one right here. This is actually just 2 coin stacks with a bunch of like flat coins on top. But these are the really cool coins where if you run through them, it just makes like that really cool sound effect of just like 5-10 coin effects going off at once. There's the drive-thrus here, which I'll quickly explain right here. There's drive-thrus 1 through 4, which you'll see when I click on these, there's no visual difference. The only difference is that there's different voice actors for each of these. There's the KW Killer Mover, which is in here, which I doubt anyone's going to use, but if you use it, cool. This is a really quick and easy way of setting up a cylindrical kill volume, but that's about it. There's tons of lights in here as well. If you are having trouble figuring out what color light you need in your map and you think it's just going to be right here, then maybe you'll benefit from this. This features every single color light from all the No Wonder maps. There's also this right here, which is something that No Wonder did, so in case you want the lily pads that slow you down, then hey, you could do that. Although I'm not sure why you want to do that, because everyone hates it anyway. There's also the water plane, which is a super nice little prefab here. Essentially what this does is it emulates gravel water, although it's kind of weird with how it's set up. But yeah, if you place this anywhere in your map, this will act as gravel water, and not even that. But if you go into the Advanced tab, you'll actually see that there is a material type. This is a property we normally don't have, but you can set this to any of these materials you want. So if you are changing all the textures in your map and you're finding that some footstep sounds are just simply not correct, you can correct it with this plane right here and just place it all over your map. Although it's a little bit annoying, at least we still have the option. There's also these ambient sound triggers just in case you want to set the quick theme of a prison or some birds. I didn't actually touch on ambient sound triggers in this tutorial for some reason, so I'll quickly do that. It's essentially ambient sound, but that can be randomly summoned around you, like surround sound. And I'll quickly pull up one of these right here, just so you can see what I'm talking about. If I pull up the properties for this right here, you'll see that in S&D, there's a lot of sound effects right here. It'll randomly pick one of these sound effects and play it somewhere around you, which is really cool. And you can also specify if one of these is supposed to be like in front of you or behind you and stuff like that. And you could also toggle this if you want it to where it loops certain sound effects or doesn't. Oh yeah, there's one other thing. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. This is just such a weird segment to the video. I'm sorry. There's the view shaker as well, which if you place down the view shaker, although you could just place one down, this one comes with pre-configured settings, so if you fire an event to it, it just shakes your screen. So this is just a really quick way of doing that. Right before I end this though, I do need to talk about all the other buttons here really quickly. I'll just basically do a speedrun of it. Right, this is new map, this is open map, save map, this is undo, redo, search for actor, actor browser, group browser. Don't use this as the music browser though, but you'll never use that. There's the sound browser, texture browser, the mesh browser, which you'll never use, the prefabs, static meshes, animations, 2D shape editor. This is the Unreal script editor, but you'll never use this. Actor property button, surface property button, which you could technically use. I just haven't got myself into the habit of doing it. This is essentially whenever you click on one of these surfaces down here, and if you were to click here, it would act as if you right clicked and then clicked on surface properties. And then there's all of these if you want to just build a certain thing in the map, like maybe you only want to build geometry or only build lighting, This stuff can be helpful, but I always found that all these were just a little bit buggy, and it was always just better if I just built all. And then there's play map, which is not what you would think it is at all, and you should never do that. And there's the help button, but this doesn't help you, ironically. There's also some other things I didn't touch on. I'll quickly go through the stuff on the left that I know at least. There's the vertex editor, which I showed in this tutorial. There is the actor rotate, which I use. This is the actor scaling. I've never personally used this, but you might find it useful. Then this is if you want to adjust how textures appear, like if you want to rotate them or move them. Then there's brush clipping, which I've literally never found a use for, and face drag I've also never used. There's the freehand polygon drawing, which essentially allows you to turn 2D. It's basically a 2D shape editor, but a lot more annoying. And then these I basically touched up on, and then this one you'll never use. You have all these four here, and I'm just going to say it, I've literally never used these, and I would literally recommend just clicking that instead. There's all these, which are pretty self-explanatory. Simply right-click on this, set the properties, and you could build your brush. Although I probably should tell you ahead of time, on the tetrahedron, be incredibly careful when clicking on this. You might think that you should set this number to something higher when building the brush, and I'll just show the brush right here so you guys can see what I'm talking about. If I click build by default, it builds that. Some people got the smart idea that you should set this to something like 12, but if you even set this to something like 6, it's gonna build a brush like this. And if you put this into your map, while it looks like super cool, this eats performance and it'll crash your freaking editor if you start going above 6. And then you have all these, which I'm pretty sure I talked about literally every single one of these except for these two right here. Basically what these do is that these interact with the brush physically. So if I were to take this brush right here and move it down a little bit into this right here, if I were to click de-intersect right here, it would disconnect from where it's intersecting from. And then this does the opposite of that, where if I were to do this, and click this, it gives me a brush right there. These can sometimes be glitchy though, so just be aware of that. And lastly, you can, well, I've already showed basically what these are, except for this one. This inverts your selection, which can be incredibly helpful in rare cases. And you could also quickly change your camera speed if you're finding that your camera speed is just simply a little bit too slow for your liking. Although, unfortunately, you can't change the actual speed. It's just more like you could generally change the speed. Alright, one last thing, okay. There's a really cool thing here, which is your level properties. You can also access this with F6, but I usually just come over here and click this instead. This is essentially just properties for your level, and this stuff can be incredibly helpful. But also right here is the most helpful right here. You can already see that I've been here before, and I have already modified this stuff for Hunt, but this stuff is normally not here, and I added this myself. But I highly advise that whenever you make a map, that you put yourself as the author and then title it in the map file, so that if someone forgets who made this map, you could always just go into the properties and then check it manually. And of course, this is only visible through here, so... Okay, last thing. I never talked about this right here. I'm actually done after this. You can click on this button right here if you want to quickly check the map for errors. And you could also scale the map just by simply clicking this and then setting the factor of how much you want to scale the map. And this will scale literally everything in the map. Once you rebuild the map, you'll see it. Which, it can create some really cool stuff very quickly. That is usually not that helpful. And then you can also remove particles if you're finding that particles in your map are just killing performance too much and you should just do away with them entirely. Well, there you go, guys. That's basically my entire comprehensive guide of how in the world you could use this editor to your advantage, you know, do all this cool stuff. If you have any questions, put them down in the comments. Hopefully I explained everything as well as I could. This is literally a 3-hour video. I hope I didn't just make a 3-hour video for no reason and didn't like perfectly explain like how to do most stuff. I know some details I definitely left out, and some things you'll definitely still need to like read the documentation for the DevKit on how to like use it, like for like fog and stuff like that. It should be decently explained there as to how to do it. But yeah, hopefully y'all enjoy having this kind of power, making levels and whatnot. I sure will, and I know that a bunch of other people, if they ever want to spend the time to do it, will definitely like doing this, so you know, it'll be cool. But yeah, anyway guys, see ya!